welcome to the channel. If you enjoy captivating stories and intriguing content, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an update. Also, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing the amazing places our community comes from. Thanks for being here and let's dive in. A soft drizzle hung over Munich's Maximilianstrasse the morning Ann-Katrin Weidmann first noticed the gap. She sat alone in the open-plan office of BaFin's Special Investigations Unit, scrolling through Wirecard AG's newly released quarterly numbers. Everything about the press release declared triumph. Explosive Asian growth, cash balances at record highs, a spotless opinion from auditors. Yet in line 42 of the supplemental notes, Ann-Katrin saw an anomaly so small it felt like a pencil smudge. Customer deposits in the Singapore subsidiary had leapt by 1.9 billion euros. Far too much for a payment processor that size and far too fast for a single quarter. The figures shimmered like a mirage. She wrote one word in the margin: impossible. At that moment, hundreds of kilometers away, Marcus Braun, Wirecard's charismatic CEO, strode onto a sleek stage in London wearing his trademark black turtleneck. With messianic calm, he promised analysts a cashless world where money flows as freely as information. His slides unfurled a future of frictionless payments, while the stock ticker behind him blinked upward in real time. Few in the crowd cared that the company's core margin seemed too perfect or that its Asia-Pacific revenue arrived from opaque, third-party acquirers. They saw only a German fintech phenom defeating the American giants at their own game. And Katrin was not alone in her doubt. Across the channel, a pair of combative journalists at the Financial Times, Dan McCrum and Stefania Palma, had spent months tracing rumors of phantom transactions. They heard of shell companies in Manila, cash balances parked in trustee accounts few auditors had ever visited, and contracts supposedly worth millions that could not be located at local registries. But every time a whistleblower surfaced, Wirecard's legal team responded with thunder. Lawsuits flew, private detectives appeared outside reporters' flats, and conspiracy theories about short-seller cabals filled German talk shows. Still, numbers rarely lie for long. And Katrin opened a new spreadsheet and entered 3 columns: reported cash, reported revenue, actual bank confirmations. She sent quiet information requests to 2 Asian banks named in Wirecard's filings, wording the letters as routine KYC checks. Weeks ticked by. Then one humid evening in early July, her encrypted inbox pinged. Both banks replied that they held no trustee accounts for Wirecard at all. In place of 1.9 billion euros sat balances just large enough to cover local payroll. The revelation felt like ice water. Yet she knew that a single regulator could not move markets. She needed corroboration. Meanwhile, McCrum and Palma prepared a long-form exposé under the code name Project Beetle. They compared invoices one whistleblower had smuggled out of Singapore to the same deals recorded in Wirecard's ledger. Dates mismatched, amounts tripled overnight, and some merchants listed had never processed a single online payment. On an overcast Tuesday, the journalists requested comment from Wirecard's board. Inside the company's glass headquarters in Askium, panic rippled. Braun convened an emergency meeting, joined by COO Jan Marsalek, a smooth operator known for secret midnight flights to Manila. They chose a familiar defense: deny, threaten, and reassure. Within hours, a polished rebuttal arrived, accusing the FT of colluding with speculators and promising an outside audit by the venerable firm KPMG. Markets hesitated, then regained faith. The share price bounced back. Hedge funds nursing short positions groaned. Braun celebrated by filming a congratulatory video for employees, urging them to ignore noise from London. Yet the KPMG review, intended as a shield, quietly morphed into a spear. Auditors asked to see original bank statements for trustee accounts in the Philippines. Wirecard produced PDF scans. KPMG demanded direct confirmation from the banks. Silence followed. Spring turned to summer. German investors, long proud of their lone tech champion in the DAX index, began to whisper uneasily. Still, Braun took the stage at the annual meeting and projected total confidence. He spoke of acquiring Chinese wallets, of issuing digital IDs, of conquering new continents. Applause filled the hall, though some clapped a beat too late. June 18, 2020 arrived like a thunderclap. At 6:58 a.m. Wirecard announced that its auditor EY could not verify 1.9 billion euros in cash, nearly a quarter of the firm's balance sheet. The money, they said, might not exist. Phones rang across Frankfurt trading floors. Algorithms digested the phrase "not exist" and began to sell. The stock plunged 60% before noon, then kept falling. Employees stared at terminal screens as if watching a building collapse in slow motion. Anne-Catherine, bleary-eyed from a pre-dawn call with the finance ministry, opened her notebook to the same word she had written months earlier: impossible. Below it she added a second: proved. That afternoon, German prosecutors raided Wirecard's headquarters. Marsalek slipped out a side exit, disappearing onto a private jet bound for Minsk and reportedly Moscow. Marcus Braun surrendered to police, escorted past cameras in a gray cashmere coat, hands trembling only slightly. The denouement felt both sudden and inevitable. Within a week, Wirecard filed for insolvency, becoming the first DAX-listed company ever to do so. Pension funds absorbed nine-figure losses, small investors wiped their savings, and regulators faced a national inquest. At BaFin, Anne-Catherine testified about the tiny line item that had alarmed her, and about the months spent waiting for a reply that finally came. Across the Thames, the FT team kept working late, documenting each ripple of the scandal with forensic calm. Some mysteries lingered: Marsalek's whereabouts, the true scale of the missing cash, the chain of complicity inside the banks that signed false letters. Yet one truth stood stark. A multinational firm had conjured nearly 2 billion euros through nothing more exotic than forged confirmations and mass credulity. The phantom profits of Munich had vanished much as they appeared, in a vapor of numbers, confidence, and rain. Outside BaFin's headquarters, the drizzle had cleared. Anne-Catherine stepped into the pale evening light, hearing distant church bells and the muted hum of traffic. She felt no triumph, only the quiet relief of a ledger reconciled at last, and the lingering question every fraud investigator carries home: what mirage is growing somewhere else, even now, behind the next perfect set of numbers? The visitors who stepped off the elevator on the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building in Midtown Manhattan often felt an uncanny stillness. Corridors were carpeted in taupe. Voices dropped to library hush as they moved past unmarked doors toward Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. Inside the reception area, a single brass plaque carried the founder's name. No electronic tickers flashed, no sales teams barked orders. Instead, clerks methodically opened envelopes, stamped trade confirmations, and filed them into tall gray cabinets. Everything about the office suggested old-world probity, the kind that promises careful stewardship rather than flash. For almost 2 decades, pension trustees, European private banks, and Florida retirees mailed their checks here with quiet confidence. They believed in Bernard Madoff, former NASDAQ chairman, son of Queens plumbers, philanthropist, softball coach. He spoke in low, avuncular tones and never chased magazine covers. His fund, he explained, used a split-strike conversion strategy, buying blue-chip stocks, selling calls, purchasing protective puts. The approach sounded sophisticated yet prudent, and the reported returns, roughly 1% a month, appeared gentle, almost boring. Investors told themselves that boring money is often the safest money. On a late August afternoon in 1999, a financial analyst named Harry Markopoulos sat inside the Boston offices of Rampart Investment Management, staring at Madoff's returns. His boss had asked whether Rampart could replicate the strategy and earn the same steady performance. Markopoulos loaded a worksheet, entered the reported figures, and watched the graph rise in a neat diagonal line. Over the same period, the S&P 500 zigzagged through crises and rallies, yet Madoff's fund barely wobbled. The simplicity felt unnatural, like a heart monitor that never missed a beat. Markopoulos ran option pricing models, stress-tested volatility assumptions, and tried to backfill transaction costs. Each calculation produced the same verdict: impossible. Madoff, he concluded, must be fabricating trades or running a classic Ponzi, using new deposits to pay earlier clients. Within 48 hours he drafted an 11-page memo to the Securities and Exchange Commission, titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." The document landed on a junior examiner's desk in Washington, joining a pile of whistleblower tips. Markopoulos's tone was urgent but measured. He offered 8 statistical red flags and invited auditors to subpoena DTCC records to verify actual equity transactions. Yet the SEC, overstretched and wary of challenging a Wall Street elder, logged the complaint and scheduled a routine inspection months later. When examiners finally arrived at the Lipstick Building, Madoff charmed them with stories from his NASDAQ days, produced stacks of client statements, and pledged full cooperation. He said the trading desk itself was located off-site, in a secret market-making facility. Inspectors nodded, took a brief tour of the empty 42nd floor, and soon closed the inquiry with minor recommendations. Years passed. The tech bubble burst, 9/11 darkened the skyline, and still Madoff delivered that quiet 1% each month. Some bankers in Geneva wondered aloud how such consistency could endure, yet they silenced their doubts with management fees. Private schools and hospitals across New England listed Bernard L. Madoff on donor walls. Country club dinners ended with toasts to the master. One looming skeptic remained, a French derivative specialist named René Magan de la Villa Huchet. He managed Access International Advisors, funneling the fortunes of European aristocrats into American funds. Villa Huchet visited Madoff regularly, impressed by the elder financier's modest office and understated Rolex. Each time he asked detailed questions about option volumes, Madoff's answer came wrapped in gentle admonition. "René, you know I can't reveal my counterparties, frontrunners would eat us alive." Villa Huchet relented, swayed by decades of reported success. In late 2008, the world changed. Lehman Brothers collapsed, credit markets froze, and anxious investors demanded liquidity. Redemption requests began piling onto Madoff's mahogany desk. Normally, he could placate one group by paying out another's new contributions, but fresh money had stopped flowing. Fear trumped greed. On the morning of December 10th, Madoff summoned his two sons, Mark and Andrew, to the apartment on East 64th Street. He confessed in halting sentences, "There is no investment fund, it's just one big lie." The fraud, he admitted, totaled around $50 billion. The sons contacted an attorney, who phoned the Federal Bureau of Investigation. When agents arrived the next day, Madoff sat in a leather armchair wearing loafers and a navy cardigan. He answered each question without resistance. "There were no trades," he said softly. "All just ledger entries." He was arrested on a single count of securities fraud and released on bail, confined to the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the view he had purchased with other people's dreams. News spread like wildfire across time zones. Portfolio managers tore open filing cabinets to discover statements printed on dot matrix paper, trades that never cleared, shares that never existed. French banks admitted billion-dollar holes, charities shuttered overnight. René Villa Huchet, unable to face clients he had ushered toward ruin, locked his Madison Avenue office and took his own life before dawn. Meanwhile, Harry Markopolos watched televised coverage, a mix of vindication and despair washing over him. He had warned authorities 9 years earlier, 5 further submissions since, yet the fraud had grown unchecked. In testimony before Congress, he described a regulatory culture too timid to challenge reputation. They took Mr. Madoff at his word, instead of checking the cash at the window. Lawmakers nodded while cameras clicked, promising reforms that would ensure next time sounded less hollow. In 2009, Bernard L. Madoff stood before Judge Denny Chin in a packed federal courtroom. Spectators leaned forward, hearts pounding, as victims spoke of emptied savings accounts and lost retirements. When Madoff rose to address the court, he kept his gaze low. "I am deeply sorry," he said, voice nearly a whisper. "I failed my investors, my family, myself." The judge pronounced a sentence of 150 years, symbolic yet potent. Madoff lowered his eyes, shackles clinking as marshals led him away. The Lipstick Building floor was soon gutted, file cabinets carted off as evidence. In a warehouse in Queens, the FBI arranged thousands of client statements in neat rows, a paper mausoleum to greed and credulity. Harry Markopolos returned to teaching risk management seminars, urging auditors to trust arithmetic over pedigree. Outside the courthouse that summer afternoon, rain misted across throngs of reporters. One elderly woman clutched a damp photo of her late husband and whispered, "We thought we were safe." Her voice vanished into the city's hum, yet the words echoed the simplest lesson behind the largest Ponzi scheme in history. When returns sound too smooth to be real, the danger lies in how gently the siren sings. The first light of dawn slipped across Page Mill Road, washing the glass facade of Theranos headquarters in a pale gold sheen. Inside the atrium, a single black box, sleek as a jewelry case no larger than a microwave, rested on a pedestal under a spotlight. Employees called it the Edison or sometimes the Mini-Lab, speaking the names with a hush usually reserved for spacecraft. According to company lore, this device needed only a fingerstick of blood to run hundreds of diagnostics, cholesterol, cancer markers, even rare genetic disorders, all within an hour. The promise felt almost mythic, painless tests that could catch disease before it bloomed. Elizabeth Holmes, the company's 31-year-old founder, moved through the corridors like a general in perpetual march, black turtleneck, green juice in hand, baritone voice already rehearsing the future. She told engineers that failing fast was the Valley's folly. Theranos, she insisted, was building a legacy to last a century. Every meeting ended with her mantra, "Do not talk about what we do. Change the world first, then tell the story." Yet behind laboratory doors on the third floor, David Boyce's non-disclosure agreements could not silence centrifuges that rattled off balance, or test cartridges that leaked crimson. Each time the Edison misread potassium or troponin levels, Lab Director Adam Rosendorf logged a delta variance and urged a halt. Accuracy, he argued, must precede ambition. But accuracy slowed timelines, and timelines controlled valuation. One evening, 23-year-old engineer Tyler Schultz, grandson of former Secretary of State George Shultz, now a Theranos board member, watched a colleague feed the machine a control sample, only to see results veer wildly from the known value. Managers instructed him to delete the run and reprime the cartridge. The phrase sounded like a broom sweeping error under a rug. Tyler drove home through the eucalyptus-lined streets of Stanford, heart hammering. He opened his laptop and composed an anonymous email to a clinical lab regulator in New York. Subject line: inconsistent proficiency testing at CLIA lab. 2 months later, Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou received a cryptic tip. Stealth blood testing unicorn can't match its own claims. Carreyrou, veteran of healthcare exposés, knew that corporate mirages often cracked at the edges where operations met science. He requested interviews. Theranos replied with slick press releases and a lawyer's warning. The silence felt louder than any denial. Meanwhile, Walgreens executives prepared grand openings of Theranos wellness centers across Arizona. Retail banners declared lab results in hours, not days, while phlebotomists pricked fingers and squeezed droplets into tiny nanotainers. Customers rarely saw what happened next. Their samples, too scant for the Edison, were loaded onto traditional Siemens analyzers tucked away on floor 4, the brand logos hastily scraped off. To disguise the bait and switch, lab staff diluted the blood to meet machine volume requirements, warping readings. Patients received cholesterol numbers that skated under danger thresholds, thyroid scores that spiked without reason, and sometimes calls instructing them to rush to the ER for false alarms. Carreyrou pressed forward, locating former employees willing to whisper off record. They spoke of software that matched live patient barcodes to archived data, producing entirely plausible but not necessarily true results. One scientist described it as medical Mad Libs. Yet sources feared ruinous lawsuits. Theranos' legal team, led by Boyce himself, trailed them with subpoenas and private investigators. Inside the boardroom, Holmes countered skepticism with spectacle. She invited generals, former senators, media moguls to witness the Edison run a complete lipid panel while they sipped espresso. Unknown to visitors, the blood coursing through the machine belonged to a quality control pool, not the VIP's finger. When numbers populated the screen in under 3 minutes, applause followed. Each clap echoed into Silicon Valley venture circles, inflating a valuation that soon touched $9 billion, on paper more than the market cap of Macy's or JetBlue. Autumn arrived, and with it, Carreyrou's first front-page investigation. Hot startup Theranos has struggled with its blood test technology. The article, cool and precise, questioned everything from instrument reliability to unreported proficiency failures. Holmes appeared on CNBC hours later, eyes unblinking behind clear glass panes, declaring, "This is what happens when you try to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, then you change the world." Her board issued unanimous support. Walgreens paused, but only briefly. Regulators could not afford poetics. In January 2016, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services arrived unannounced at the company's Newark, California lab. Inspectors sifted through SOP binders and temperature logs, retested samples, interviewed night shift technicians. They uncovered critical violations: unqualified personnel, expired reagents, quality controls penciled in after the fact. A formal letter followed, citing immediate jeopardy to patient health and threatening to revoke the lab's license. The siege walls now cracked quickly. Walgreens terminated its partnership. Safeway wrote down a $350 million alliance, and the capital, once eager for the next Steve Jobs, recoiled. Employees filed out carrying cardboard boxes past motivational posters that read, "Less words, more actions." Upstairs, Holmes gripped a conference room table, still repeating, "We'll pivot. We'll miniaturize the Siemens hardware, bring it all in-house." Silence greeted her. Even Sunny Balwani, the operations hard-charging president and her longtime companion, had begun searching for lawyers of his own. In March 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Holmes and Balwani with massive fraud. The complaint described a pattern as simple as it was bold: overstated revenue projections, fabricated demonstrations, misuse of logos from the Department of Defense. Holmes relinquished voting control, paid a $500,000 fine, yet still avoided immediate jail. Federal prosecutors, unsatisfied, convened a grand jury. The criminal trial opened 3 years later in San Jose. Prosecutors led jurors through lab logs and doctored Pfizer reports. Defense counsel invoked entrepreneurial optimism, as though faith could bridge decimal points. After 7 days of deliberation, the panel returned guilty verdicts on 4 counts of wire fraud. Holmes, once hailed as the youngest self-made billionaire, now awaited a sentence that could span more years than the company ever operated. On the morning judgment was read, a light rain fell across the Santa Clara Valley. In the courthouse hallway, John Carreyrou stood among camera crews, expression quiet. Tyler Schultz arrived with his parents, head bowed, but relief in his shoulders. They did not cheer when the verdict came. Instead, they breathed out, as lab workers do after balancing centrifuge rotors at last. Outside, the rain stopped. Sunlight caught on puddles, tiny mirrors across pavement, each reflecting a fragment of sky. Somewhere, another startup plotted disruption. And in the echo of that bright promise lingered the lesson of the crimson drop. In medicine, as in finance, there is no shortcut past the simple, stubborn demand that a result be true. Dawn lifted slowly over the concrete tributaries of Interstate 10, tinting Houston's air a soft amber as the towers of the Enron Center caught the first sun. From the street, the glass cylinders looked flawless, architectural metaphors for limitless energy, perpetual motion, pure American optimism. On the 28th floor, Sharon Watkins, a mid-level vice president surrounded by fresh audit binders, stared at a number that refused to balance. It was only a line in a footnote: related party equity losses deferred, $234 million. The phrase suggested an accounting cul-de-sac where bad news was parked out of sight. She wrote a question mark, circled it twice, and felt the first curl of worry rise like smoke. That same morning, across town at an elementary school fundraiser, Jeffrey Skilling accepted a plaque for Corporate Citizen of the Year. He spoke lightly about innovation barrels, asset-light pipelines, and the bright destiny of deregulated power markets. Teachers clapped, not fully sure what Enron did anymore: gas trading, broadband, weather futures, but confident it was something clever. The share price hovered above $90, wallets thick with employee stock options that could, everyone said, buy boats on Galveston Bay. Back in her office, Watkins opened a hidden worksheet embedded in the general ledger. The tab was labeled Raptor Reserves. Inside, debt and equity blurred. The Raptors were special-purpose entities supposedly hedging Enron's technology investments. Yet the assets booked as collateral were Enron's own rising stock, a hall of mirrors defense against decline. Should the price slip, both hedger and hedge would fall together. Watkins traced the ownership trail to a partnership named LJM2, managed not by some outside banker but by Enron's chief financial officer Andrew Fastow. The conflict felt radioactive. 2 floors above, Fastow himself paced a glass-walled conference room, rehearsing slides for the upcoming analyst call. He loved the theater of earnings season. Adjust a few assumptions, move a handful of liabilities offshore, and income blossomed right on cue. He cued the projector to a bar chart rising quarter after quarter. Robust recurring earnings, he would say, voice silky, before fielding softball questions from brokerage houses fat with underwriting fees. Watkins printed her findings, 7 dense pages, and sealed them in an envelope marked confidential, CO only. Skilling received the memo while traveling but forwarded it to the company's law firm, Vinson and Elkins, asking for comfort. Lawyers interviewed managers who assured them the structures were within the rules. No one phoned the SEC. Weeks later, Skilling resigned abruptly, citing personal reasons, and handed the reins to Chairman Kenneth Lay, the founding patriarch who preferred golf and political fundraising to operational grit. The stock slipped, but only slightly. In bull markets, investors forgive leadership changes as mere costume swaps. Yet small fissures widened. California's electricity crisis exposed Enron traders bragging over recorded lines about Death Star strategies, routing power in circles to inflate prices. Journalists latched on, regulators sniffed louder, and the bond market began charging Enron a little more to borrow. Inside Treasury, spreadsheets that once balanced with ease now required night owl tinkering. October 16, 2001 arrived with clear skies and an innocuous headline. Enron announces third quarter earnings non-recurring charge. The charge totaled $1.2 billion, tied vaguely to LJM partnerships. Analysts blinked. Credit rating agencies placed the company on watch. The share price, which had touched 90 the previous year, fell below 30 by sunset. Fasto was fired. His silver cufflinks caught camera flashes as he exited carrying a single manila folder. Across the skyline, employees watched ticker symbols slide while elevator chatter thickened. Many had most of their retirement savings in Enron stock, encouraged by pep talks in the cafeteria, and lockup rules prevented selling during planned rebalancing. As Halloween neared, cubicles sprouted for sale signs in jest. The laughter sounded brittle. Watkins, now cooperating quietly with an internal task force, briefed the board's audit committee. She explained how Raptors relied on Enron equity staying aloft, how hidden guarantees violated basic consolidation rules, how Fasto had earned tens of millions inside deals. Some directors asked probing questions. Others stared at their shoes. They voted to alert the SEC, but by then short sellers had already dug through public filings and smelled blood. On November 8, Enron admitted it had overstated profits by nearly $600 million since 1997 and would restate earnings back 5 years. Moody's and S&P cut ratings to junk within hours, triggering debt covenants that demanded immediate repayment of billions. Banks slammed their doors. Trading partners demanded cash collateral Enron no longer had. In the trading pit the next morning, phones rang unanswered while risk officers scrambled to unwind positions. The once mighty market maker could not cover even mundane gas swaps without counterparties insisting on fortress-level margins. December 2, 2001, 5:25 p.m. Enron filed for Chapter 11 protection, the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history at that moment. Security guards escorted employees from the lobby as camera crews filmed cardboard boxes rolling through revolving doors. One salesman paused, looking up at the mirrored towers now reflecting a winter dusk, and muttered, "Thought we were the smartest guys in the room." Investigations soon radiated outward. Congressional hearings replayed trader tapes boasting of Grandma Millie stuck with soaring utility bills. Andrew Fasto pleaded guilty to wire fraud, agreeing to testify. Jeffrey Skilling fought the charges, insisting market panic, not accounting games, killed the company. Kenneth Lay, awaiting trial, suffered a fatal heart attack at his Colorado lodge. Some called it the final escape clause. Sharon Watkins testified too, voice steady, describing the moment she realized the Titanic was on fire. Lawmakers praised her as an early whistleblower, though she never went public until the ship was listing. Thousands of employees lost pensions, while auditor Arthur Anderson shattered under obstruction of justice charges, its shredded reputation floating down a Chicago street like confetti. Years later, on a humid evening near Buffalo Bayou, a tour guide pointed to the vacant lot where Enron's bridge once connected 2 towers. "They took it down for safety," he said quietly. Visitors peered up at blank glass and imagined the invisible pipeline of numbers that once coursed through steel and silicon. In the hush that followed, a simple lesson seemed to hang in the muggy air. When a company's profits depend on keeping its own reflection bright, the first crack of truth spreads faster than any engineer or trader can patch. And somewhere beyond the skyline, a single memo lay archived in a courtroom box. 7 pages of calm arithmetic that saw the smoke before anyone else smelled fire. Night air lay thick over Singapore's boat quay as cargo lights shimmered across the water, turning the river into strips of moving copper. On the fourth floor of the Barings Futures office, a young derivatives trader named Nick Leeson leaned over twin computer screens, sleeves rolled past his elbows, fingers gliding in a blur of keystrokes. Outside, the city prepared to sleep. Inside, he chased one last trade that might erase a day's red ink before Tokyo woke. The hum of the air conditioning, steady as a heartbeat, masked the danger unfolding with each new contract. Barings Bank, merchant to Kings, financier of the Louisiana Purchase, 232 years old, had assigned Leeson to handle back-office reconciliations, as well as front-office trading in Nikkei futures, a pairing that broke every separation rule in finance. But the London partners liked his swagger and the profits he wired home. $500,000 in January, $2 million in February, more in March. Each month's faxed reports arrived trimmed of clutter, rows of rising numbers beside a tidy signature. "Brilliant lad," the partners whispered over port. No one asked how risk could vanish so neatly. At first Leeson's bets were small, arbitrage plays between Osaka and Singapore that paid pennies per contract. But arbitrage is a tightrope. A stiff breeze can tilt both markets in unison. When an early mismatch cost him £20,000, he ducked into the settlement system and shifted the loss into an error account labeled 88,888, 5 lucky eights, a superstition borrowed from Cantonese traders. He told himself he would reverse the red tomorrow. Tomorrow slipped, the loss doubled, and the account became a vault for every misstep. 2 floors below, a soft-spoken clerk named Debbie Koo noticed the growing balance in 88888. She sent an email to London, "Please confirm treatment of suspense account." The reply arrived days later, brief and soothing, "Handled by Mr. Leeson, no issue." Koo archived the message and returned to sorting trade tickets, the river's copper light now replaced by fluorescent white. June 1994 ushered in monsoon storms and sudden gales across East Asia. Leeson, chasing recovery, placed directional bets, long Nikkei, short volatility, confident that Japan's central bank would buoy the index. When markets drifted sideways, he doubled exposure. A colleague joked that his positions were bigger than the Bank of England. Leeson laughed, then wired fresh margin to Osaka, drawing on Barings' Singapore cash pool without head office clearance. London executives, seeing another strong revenue month, approved larger funding lines. Success breeds permissions that scrutiny would deny. Christmas arrived with champagne at Barings' Bishopsgate office. Partners toasted to a £28 million profit from the Singapore unit. Leeson phoned in, accepted applause, and stared at the true figure glowing on his private screen. A £200 million hole buried in 88888. He pictured it as a crater under pristine snow, invisible until a footstep plunged through. Then came January 17, 1995. A pre-dawn earthquake ripped through Kobe, magnitude 6.9, toppling highways and igniting oil tanks. Global markets reeled, the Nikkei tumbled. Leeson, terrified that his short volatility stance would collapse, doubled yet again, betting the index would rebound on reconstruction optimism. The wager now measured in billions of yen. Each tick down cost Barings almost £1 million. Still the Nikkei slid, slow and relentless, like the tectonic plate that had shifted beneath Kobe. Back in London, Treasury Manager Peter Norris opened a routine funding request from Singapore, £50 million for arbitrage settlement. He hesitated, then approved. Barings could not afford a failed margin call without denting its storied reputation. Another request followed, then another. By early February, the Singapore branch had drawn nearly £500 million, more than the bank's entire capital reserve, yet profit reports still sparkled. Audit partner Price Waterhouse arrived for an on-site review. Leeson guided them through spotless trade tickets, stacks of daily journals, and a live demo of the settlement software, carefully coded to block outsiders from viewing 88888. The auditors found minor procedural lapses but concluded, overall controls satisfactory. Outside, evening rain pelted the windows like tiny coins, each drop a reminder of the storm no one yet saw. February 23, 8:15 a.m., Changi Airport. Nick Leeson set his briefcase on a departure counter, ticket to Kuala Lumpur in hand. Inside the briefcase lay a one-line note addressed to Barings Group Treasurer. Sorry. Overnight the Nikkei had fallen another 300 points. Leeson's margin calls exceeded £830 million. He felt the bank's weight on his chest as he stepped through security, disappearing into the crowd. That same hour, back in the Singapore office, Operations Head Ron Baker opened system logs to clear overnight batches and found the 88888 account flashing like a fire alarm, red digits frozen at minus £827 million. He phoned London, voice flat. "We have a situation." Silence met him, followed by the frantic rustle of papers, then a single question from a senior partner. "How can that number be real?" The answer arrived 48 hours later when administrators laid out the full ledger. Barings held liquid assets of roughly £440 million, half what Leeson had lost. By Sunday evening, the Bank of England convened a rescue auction. No buyer emerged. At 7:57 a.m. Monday, Barings Brothers and Company filed for insolvency, collapsing under a hole dug by one man with access to both sides of the trade. Employees in London wept as security badges failed at turnstiles. In Singapore, clerks stood outside the shuttered office, watching cleaners peel the Barings logo from glass doors. Leeson was arrested in Frankfurt weeks later, extradited, and sentenced by a Singapore court to 6.5 years. Inside Changi prison, he wrote letters describing the glamour of fear, the addict's rush of chasing a loss until reality finally collects the debt. Barings remnants were sold to ING for £1 less than the price of a single latte on Boat Quay. Years on, tourists sipping coffee by the river sometimes point to a low-rise building now housing tech startups. Guides tell the tale of account 88888, the shadow ledger that sank the Queen's banker, and they end with an image easy to picture. A solitary trader in a fluorescent room, staring at figures that grow darker the longer one looks away. What lingers is not the size of the loss but the gap between illusion and inquiry, a gap wide enough to swallow centuries of reputation the moment everyone assumes someone else is watching. A lavender dawn drifted over the wheat fields outside Parma when the first tank trucks rumbled through the gates of Parmalat's Collecchio plant. Stainless steel hatches hissed open, warm milk splashed into holding vats, and the air filled with a faint, sweet fog. Inside headquarters, an unadorned, butter-colored block beside the factory, the chief financial officer, Fausto Tana, sat beneath a framed photo of grazing Holsteins, adding final tweaks to a press release. Parmalat, it declared, had ended the quarter with €4 billion in cash, solidifying its place as the safest blue chip in all of Italy. Across the hall, founder Callisto Tanzi straightened his tie. At 65 he still resembled the parish treasurer he once was. Modest suit, shy smile, voice almost apologetic. Yet the company he built now spanned 5 continents. Yogurts in Sao Paulo, fruit juice in Johannesburg, shelf-stable milk in Sydney, its logo stamped on Formula One cars and children's soccer jerseys. Shareholders loved the simple story: people drink milk every day, therefore revenue can only rise. Few paused to ask how a dairy cooperative could amass more liquidity than some national banks. That question first troubled a London credit analyst named Lorenzo Paulini. One foggy afternoon in the city, he scanned Parmalat's latest balance sheet and frowned at note 18. Cash and marketable securities held at Bank of America, Cayman, Euro 3.95 billion. The number dwarfed the region's entire branch deposits. Paulini rang a contact at the Cayman Monetary Authority. The official chuckled, saying Bank of America didn't even operate a retail branch on the island. Perhaps it was booked through a trust? Perhaps. But the analyst scribbled 2 words in his notebook: prove it. Meanwhile, back in Parma, Tana opened a password-locked folder named Buco, the Hole. Inside lay dozens of Excel files tracing loans from Parmalat's subsidiaries to offshore vehicles with musical names: Bucanero, Epicurum, Mopper. Each vehicle, in turn, invested in Parmalat bonds, creating a circle where cash left the left pocket only to reappear in the right, minus a banker's fee. As long as auditors saw interest income flowing, nobody asked if the principal existed. In Milan, Deloitte's Italian affiliate prepared to sign another clean audit. When junior staff requested third-party confirmation of the Cayman account, Tana furnished a crisp fax on Bank of America letterhead, stamped and signed by a Mr. H. Graff. The young auditor noted the Cayman number rang a Parma fax machine after hours but let the details slide. December deadlines loomed and holidays beckoned. Across the Atlantic, Parmalat's American depository receipts traded briskly on the NYSE. U.S. fund managers hunting yield after the dot-com crash, loaded up on the milk bond, a 5-year note sporting a juicy 7% coupon. CNBC anchors praised Tansy's boring brilliance, concluding that refrigerators would hum regardless of Silicon Valley's fate. The price inched up. Tansy quietly pledged more shares to secure private loans, funneling cash into a side project. Parma Calcio 1913, the local football club chasing Champions League glory. Summer 2003 scorched the Po Valley. Herds sought shade, milk volumes dipped, and suppliers demanded faster payments. Treasury lines grew taut. To plug gaps, Tana drafted an 8-page prospectus for a fresh €300 million bond. Rating agencies signaled tentative approval. Parmalat's alleged cash mountain dwarfed the raise. Yet Paulini, still uneasy, convinced his bank's trading desk to short the new issue on day one. September brought a tremor. A tiny Milan newspaper ran a column titled Latte e Mistero, alleging that Parmalat's Brazilian subsidiary was missing funds. The company dismissed the claim as provincial gossip, but bond spreads widened a hair. Tansy summoned his board, assuring them liquidity was abundant. After the meeting, he ordered Treasury to wire €30 million to Brazil, covering a payroll that should have been routine. In mid-November, investment bank Merrill Lynch attempted to sell Parmalat a complex derivative in exchange for €500 million cash up front. Due diligence required fresh proof of reserves. Merrill's analyst dialed the Cayman fax number. It rang unanswered. She escalated to Bank of America's European head, who confirmed no such account existed. Within 24 hours Merrill withdrew, and whispers rippled through Milan's finance district like pigeons scattering in a piazza. December 9, 2003, 7:30 a.m. Parmalat's switchboard lit up with calls from journalists asking about the Cayman funds. Tana locked his office door and tried to fax the same forged statement one more time, but the machine jammed, spitting out crumpled paper. He sank into his chair, staring at the mangled letterhead, heart thudding in his ears. That evening, Italy's market regulator, Consub, froze trading in Parmalat shares and demanded answers within 48 hours. Tansy drove home along fog-slicked roads, the headlights carving ghostly tunnels through farmland he once roamed, delivering cheese wheels with his father. He rehearsed explanations, temporary misallocation, auditor confusion, but each felt brittle. December 19, Deloitte officially declared the Bank of America document not genuine. The cash was a phantom. Bonds collapsed to 20 cents on the euro. Supermarkets yanked Parmalat milk from end cap displays, fearing consumer backlash. Outside headquarters, tanker drivers honked in protest, unpaid for weeks. Employees, holding Christmas panettone boxes from the company canteen, watched riot police string tape across the main entrance. On Christmas Eve, prosecutors arrested Tana. Under fluorescent interrogation lights, he confessed to a €14 billion shortfall, at the time Europe's largest corporate fraud. 4 days later, tan overcoat buttoned to the neck, Callisto Tansy surrendered. Cameras captured him stepping from a police car into Parma's courthouse, snowflakes melting on his thinning hair. He murmured, "I only wanted the company to grow." The phrase fell flat against the stone facade. Administrators carved Parmalat into a new entity, selling non-core assets and suing banks that had spun the merry-go-round of offshore notes. Thousands of Italian retirees, whose savings lay in milk bonds once deemed as safe as government paper, filed claims. In villages across Emilia-Romagna, parish priests collected envelopes for families who had lost both jobs and nest eggs in the same collapse. Years later, along the Strada del Prosciutto, a guide points to the rebuilt plant, now sporting a new logo under French ownership. Visitors sip tiny cartons of latte and listen to the saga, how a shy grocer forged a global empire from UHT milk and then from numbers alone, how a single fake fax toppled a dynasty older than most of its drinkers. The lesson rises like steam from warm milk into winter air. Balance sheets can be pasteurized until nothing harmful seems alive, but the truth, like raw cream, always floats back to the surface. The Appalachian sun burned low when a small white Volkswagen Jetta eased onto Interstate 81, its tailpipe linked by rubber tubing to a portable emissions analyzer riding in the trunk. Inside the car, graduate engineer Arvind Thiruvengadam glanced at the digital readout, numbers climbing faster than mountains flicking past his window. He and two colleagues from West Virginia University had been hired by a non-profit to test diesel cars under real-world conditions, a modest project meant to praise European efficiency. Yet the Jetta's nitrogen oxide output spiked to 40 times the US legal limit each time the wheels touched highway asphalt. Arvind noted the reading in his logbook, circled it, and wrote a single word: impossible. 6 time zones east, in Volkswagen's glass and steel headquarters at Wolfsburg, powertrain executive Oliver Schmidt skimmed a routine email marked US market anomaly reports. Engineers in California, it said, had asked for an explanation of elevated NO during off-cycle testing. Schmidt sighed. He knew the answer but not the solution. Each affected car carried secret code lines, defeat logic, that sensed steering angle, barometric pressure, and drive wheel motion. In a laboratory with tires spinning yet the car unmoving, software dialed back emissions to saintly levels. On open roads the algorithm switched to performance mode, trading clean air for brisk torque. The cheat had been born 9 years earlier, after US regulators tightened diesel standards to match gasoline cars. Rather than spend billions on urea injection hardware, a group of engineers proposed a shortcut: detect the test, pass the test, protect the brand. Managers, wary of losing market share, nodded. Over time, the existence of auxiliary emission control devices became a whispered fact, documented only in scrambled variable names deep inside engine maps. Back in Morgantown, the researchers tested a second Volkswagen, then a BMW. The BMW's output hovered near compliance, suggesting the device was brand-specific. Their 108-page report, Dry Tables, Compros, landed on desks at the California Air Resources Board (CRB) in May 2014. CARB summoned Volkswagen's U.S. technical team to Sacramento, projecting the WVU graphs onto a screen. VW engineers blamed road grade, fuel quality, even data logger calibration, offering patch updates that nudged readings lower but never near legal thresholds. Months spiraled away. Schmidt flew to Washington, urging the Environmental Protection Agency to certify the new 2016 diesel lineup. EPA staff, unconvinced, withheld approval and demanded proof the anomaly was fixed. Internal emails now bristled with desperation. They know. We have to come clean. Management says no. In Wolfsburg, CEO Martin Winterkorn insisted the matter be closed before the Frankfurt Motor Show. The diesel was centerpiece to his global expansion plan. September 3, 2015. During a final tense video conference, a mid-level software strategist finally admitted what regulators already suspected. There is a defeat device, he said, voice barely above a whisper. CARB notified EPA. EPA drafted a notice of violation but kept it sealed during verification. 2 weeks later, 7:28 a.m. Frankfurt time, Winterkorn strode across a glittering stage to unveil the new Passat. Cameras flashed, the diesel badge gleamed. 2 hours later in Washington, the EPA released its notice to the public. Volkswagen had installed illegal software on 482,000 US vehicles, potentially 11 million worldwide. News wires lit up. At Wolfsburg trading desks, the share price plunged 18% before lunch, wiping 14 billion euros in capitalization. Employees watched ticker banners like villagers seeing a river reverse. Inside a conference room nicknamed Detroit, executives debated framing the issue as technical glitch, but fresh documents surfaced. Slide decks labeled acoustic function, spreadsheets tracking 2 calibrations, Mode 0 test, and Mode 1 street. Winterkorn recorded a late-night apology video, brows knitted, voice grave. We have broken the trust of our customers. Was not enough. He resigned within days, the first CEO of the modern Volkswagen empire felled by exhaust. Courts, regulators, and parliaments advanced in overlapping waves. In the United States, the Department of Justice prepared criminal indictments. In Germany, prosecutors raided 30 addresses, seizing laptops and line-of-code printouts. Oliver Schmidt, caught returning from vacation at Miami International Airport, was led away in handcuffs, later sentenced to 7 years for conspiracy. Engineers who once fine-tuned throttle curves found themselves diagramming defeat logic flowcharts before stone-faced judges. Meanwhile, owners worldwide lined up for software fixes that dulled acceleration and tanked resale values. Some held class action banners outside dealerships. Clean diesel, dirty lie. Others simply peeled badges from trunks in quiet disappointment. The settlement bill ballooned past 30 billion euros, buybacks, fines, battery plant pledges, dwarfing even the oil spill penalties of earlier decades. Arvind Thiravangadam watched from Morgantown as headlines credited independent university research with toppling the world's largest carmaker. He felt no triumph, only the sober awe of someone who touched a thread and found it wrapped around a colossus. During a campus lecture, he displayed the original Interstate 81 emissions graph, jagged, ugly, and told students, "Truth often looks like noise. Keep listening." 3 winters later, on a gray morning in Lower Saxony, demolition crews dismantled an old smokestack once used for diesel engine testing. Workers paused as blue haze drifted upward, a spectral reminder of promises sold on glossy brochures. Nearby, electric ID.3 hatchbacks waited for rail transport, symbols of a pivot that cost tens of billions yet might salvage a reputation. The scandal left regulators sharper, software logs subpoena ready, and a new dictionary entry where defeat device sits beside Ponzi and kickback. But its deeper lesson rests with every engineer staring at a line of rogue code and rationalizing that a tiny deception will stay small. Like exhaust molecules, fraud disperses until wind changes reveal the plume. And so, on highways from Appalachia to the Autobahn, as drivers accelerate past roadside pines, a question lingers in the hum of tires. What unseen switch flips when oversight ends, turning innovation into illusion and clean diesel into the blue haze that once fooled the world? A humid dusk settled over the pine woods of central Mississippi as Cynthia Cooper walked the quiet corridors of WorldCom's headquarters in Clinton. Cleaning crews whispered past with carts of lemon polish, but the finance wing remained lit. Cynthia and 2 auditors bent over binders piled like levees against a flood. She had spent weeks sampling invoices, chasing odd entries tagged line cost capitalization, and one pattern never quit her mind. Expenses that should have flowed straight to the income statement were instead perched on the balance sheet as assets. By the soft glow of a desk lamp, she turned another page and felt a shiver. The number was now $3.8 billion. 5 years earlier, WorldCom had been the darling of Wall Street. CEO Bernard "Bernie" Ebbers, 6'4", a former motel owner with a preacher's cadence, promised to stitch together regional phone carriers into a single fiber optic giant. Each merger press release came laced with country aphorisms. You can't plow a field by turning it over in your mind, and a claim that earnings would soar through efficiency. Analysts loved the folksy bravado. They scribbled by notes and watched the stock split again and again. Yet the long-distance market proved less a gold mine than quicksand. Prices fell, competitors hacked away at margins, and the internet bubbles burst left and used fiber dark beneath highways. Ebbers, whose personal loans were collateralized by WorldCom shares, could not afford a decline. In early 2001, he convened a closed meeting with CFO Scott Sullivan. According to later testimony, Sullivan sketched a solution on a yellow pad: reclassify routine network access fees as capital investment. The accounting move would slash expenses today, push depreciation far into the future, and keep profit curves rising. Ebbers nodded once. The job of planting the entries fell to the corporate accounting group in Clinton. They opened a new general ledger bucket, prepaid capacity, and each quarter shoveled hundreds of millions into it. No press release mentioned the shift. Footnotes labeled the change refinement of capitalization policy, bland words that neither auditors nor investors probed deeply. In New York, telecom analysts saw steady earnings and raised price targets. Cynthia Cooper, vice president of internal audit, was not in the loop. Her team's routine testing picked up outliers, line cost accruals reversing without cash, depreciation charges oddly small. When she asked the controller's office for details, replies came slow and guarded. One manager hinted that the entries were topside adjustments from corporate. Don't worry. The reassurance sounded hollow. By June 2002, pressure mounted. WorldCom had missed revenue guidance twice, and rumors swirled of SEC sweeps after the Enron collapse. Cooper requested broader access to journal vouchers. Sullivan, usually cordial, bristled and told her to focus on Sarbanes checklists. She pressed anyway, assembling a secret working group of 2 auditors sworn to silence. Late nights became routine, the building hushed except for distant air handlers and the scratch of calculator keys. On June 15, they traced one suspicious voucher to its approval chain. No supporting invoice, just Sullivan's digital signature and the memo line corporate ADJ. The amount, $500 million, nearly matched that week's analyst consensus gap. Cooper's stomach tightened. She drafted a chronology, stapled backup spreadsheets, and booked a meeting with the audit committee chair, Max Bobbitt, former head of a North Carolina utility. Bobbitt listened, brows knitting, then phoned outside counsel. Within 48 hours, WorldCom's board hired KPMG to perform an emergency review, sidelining longtime auditor Arthur Anderson, already wounded by Enron. Sullivan tried to explain the entries as industry standard, but when asked for peer examples he offered none. The facade cracked. June 25, 2002 dawned sticky and overcast. At 9 a.m. WorldCom issued an 8-sentence press release. It would restate earnings downward by $3.8 billion due to improper capitalization of line costs. Phones rang in trading rooms. Within minutes the stock, once worth $64, fell below $1. Pension funds holding safe, telecom waiting saw billions vaporize before lunch. In Clinton, employees gathered around televisions in the cafeteria, watching CNBC anchors call it the biggest accounting fraud in U.S. history. Some stared blankly, others cursed under their breath. Their 401(k)s were stuffed with matching shares that now priced like pennies on asphalt. Bernie Ebbers addressed staff via video, voice quavering, "The company is strong. We will move forward." Hours later he resigned at the board's insistence. Congress reacted with fury. Lawmakers already drafting Sarbanes-Oxley provisions sharpened their pens, citing WorldCom as proof that self-policing had failed. In August, the company filed for Chapter 11, listing assets of $107 billion and debts nearly as high, another record collapse. Creditors spent months mapping fiber routes and regional switches, deciding what parts to salvage. Scott Sullivan pleaded guilty to securities fraud and, in exchange for leniency, testified against his former boss. The trial of Bernard Ebbers opened in early 2005 at the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Jurors heard recordings of earnings calls where Ebbers pledged consistent growth, even as internal memos warned of hemorrhaging cash. On the stand, he claimed ignorance of accounting minutiae, likening himself to a coach who trusts the quarterback. Prosecutors displayed the yellow pad sketch. The jury took 3 days to convict. Judge Barbara Jones, citing devastation to countless retirees, imposed 25 years. Cynthia Cooper never sought the limelight, yet Time magazine placed her on its cover as one of 3 persons of the year. When asked why she persisted, she spoke of a simple obligation: "If I don't look, who will?" WorldCom emerged from bankruptcy in 2004 under the new name MCI, later absorbed by Verizon. The Clinton campus stands half-occupied now, pine needles gathering at doorways. On summer evenings, a faint glow still burns in one corner office where Cooper once tallied the entries that toppled a telecom titan. The lesson echoes down abandoned cubicle rows. Numbers can travel the world in milliseconds, but truth keeps its own slow, relentless schedule, arriving like a Mississippi thunderstorm, when silence can no longer hold the heat. Morning fog still hugged Market Street when Carrie Tolstedt stepped from a black sedan and crossed the granite plaza of Wells Fargo's headquarters. Inside the marble lobby, a bronze stagecoach gleamed beneath spotlights, its wheels frozen mid-gallop, an emblem of trust that had survived gold rush panics and 2 world wars. Tolstedt, head of community banking, passed the sculpture each dawn repeating the same maxim, "8 is great." The phrase referred to cross-selling, persuading every customer to hold 8 Wells Fargo products, from checking to credit cards. Executives called it deepening relationships. Branch tellers, glancing at monthly scoreboards, called it the number that decided careers. Across the bay in Richmond, a young personal banker named Maria Alvarez unlocked her branch at 7:15 a.m. She scanned the whiteboard listing each employee's daily targets. 3 new checking accounts, 2 credit card applications, 1 online banking enrollment. Yesterday she closed only 5 of 6 goals, and the branch manager had hinted at coaching. Maria switched on her terminal, heart quickening, and began dialing inactive leads. When no one answered, she opened the profile of a longtime customer, Mr. Earl Watkins, age 79, and clicked Add Debit Card. She would later shred the plastic when it arrived, but the system would still register as sale. Such phantom clicks multiplied by the thousands each day. Tellers with quota gaps opened ghost savings accounts. funded with $5 transfers from customers' real balances, then reversed the transfer before statements printed. Some created email addresses like john.doe@hotmail.com to enroll clients in bill pay, earning instant credit for a digital solution. The practice had begun as an occasional shortcut yet metastasized under relentless pressure from regional managers who circulated rankings in red and green ink. In conference calls, Tolstedt praised top performers, while laggards heard recordings of stagecoach wheels cracking whips. In April 2013, a Los Angeles branch customer noticed overdraft fees on an account she never requested. She confronted the manager, who quietly reversed the charges. The story reached the city attorney's office, landing on the desk of investigator Arturo Gonzalez. He found additional complaints, small sums, similar patterns. Gonzalez subpoenaed internal records and discovered clusters of accounts opened within minutes of each other, all linked to identical IP addresses inside branches. He drafted a civil complaint accusing Wells Fargo of widespread, systemic fraud, but knew the bank's lawyers would contest every decimal. Back in San Francisco, CEO John Stumpf sailed through quarterly earnings calls. He boasted that Wells Fargo averaged 6.15 products per household, far ahead of peers. Analysts applauded, stock climbed, and Stumpf's compensation swelled. When one reporter asked how the bank achieved such consistency, he credited culture. Yet inside risk management, auditor John Shrewsbury reviewed whistleblower hotline logs and saw the cracks widening. Employees cited gaming, sandbagging, click-offs. One wrote, "I'm afraid to refuse a manager order." Shrewsbury compiled a memo recommending deeper controls. The response from retail leadership came crisp. Isolated incidents addressed through coaching. Memo filed, bonuses approved. Summer 2015, the Los Angeles lawsuit entered discovery. Bank attorneys, combing employee emails, stumbled upon internal spreadsheets tracking bundling velocity and daily solutions gap. Some lines showed negative balances paid off with branch-level expense accounts, proof of unauthorized fees. Settlements were floated, but regulators had now joined the fray. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, OCC, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, opened parallel probes, demanding call center recordings, termination logs, and metrics that executives once flaunted on stage. An OCC examiner interviewing branch workers in Phoenix heard the same refrain: push products or punch out. She relayed findings to Washington, where spreadsheets of falsified PIN numbers piled high. The scale stunned even seasoned regulators. Over 2 million suspect accounts, 565,000 credit cards, untold emails created out of thin air. September 8, 2016. Wells Fargo agreed to pay $185 million in penalties and fire 5,300 employees involved in misconduct. Press releases tried to frame the issue as bad apples, but headlines focused on the stagecoach losing a wheel. On CNBC, Stumpf insisted, "We never had a sales quota," a statement contradicted minutes later by a leaked internal manual titled Playbook for 8 Solutions. The share price sagged. Senate Banking Committee Chair Elizabeth Warren summoned Stumpf to testify. In Washington's Dirksen building, cameras crowded as Warren locked eyes with the CEO. She asked whether he had returned any of his $200 million in stock gains. Stumpf stammered, "I serve at the pleasure of the board." Her retort, "You should resign," ricocheted across social media. Within weeks, Stumpf did. Tolstedt departed too, her reputation reduced from retail banking genius to architect of a quota mill. Maria Alvarez watched the hearing on a breakroom television, nerves tight. Her ghost accounts had been closed, her metrics reset to zero, and she faced an ethics inquiry despite following orders. She wondered if upper floors felt the same dread when auditors called their names. Regulators mandated a historic overhaul. Elimination of product-based goals, independent board oversight, and restitution to every affected customer, even those charged only a few dollars. The bank booked $3 billion in remediation costs and launched commercials promising re-established 2020. But trust proved harder to rebuild than marble lobbies. Surveys ranked Wells Fargo last among major banks for customer loyalty 3 years running. In a quiet cubicle, Shrewsbury drafted a final report on lessons learned. Culture cannot be measured solely in credit sold. Metrics must serve customers, not supersede them. The document circulated through compliance channels, modest in tone, heavy with hindsight. Whether its warnings would stick remained uncertain. Stagecoaches, after all, roll on wheels that can still spin too fast. Today, commuters exiting the Montgomery Street BART station still pass the gleaming bronze coach. Children pose for photos, unaware of the ghost accounts that once lurked behind its polished facade. The scandal's residue lingers in small ways: a teller pausing before offering a new card, a manager checking that consent form twice. Each hesitation is a faint echo of those quiet clicks in branches where a number mattered more than a name. The moral settles like fog at dawn, pressure that outruns principle will turn honest keystrokes into silent fraud, and the path from relationship to exploitation can be crossed with nothing more than the tap of a mouse inside a bank built on trust. A fine sleet hung over La Défense on Friday, January 18, 2008, blurring the mirrored facade of Société Générale's twin towers. Inside the Delta Trading Complex, a junior employee named Jerome Kerviel sat at his terminal, hands flat on the keyboard, eyes traveling across a lattice of futures contracts worth tens of billions of euros. The positions were impossible, vaster than the bank's authorized limits, vaster than many sovereign funds, yet they glowed on his screen alone. In the official risk dashboards they were ghosts, cancelled out by fictitious hedges Kerviel had fabricated over months of patient deceit. He was the unlikeliest of rogue traders, a quiet Breton who had joined SOCGen's back office straight from a provincial university, absorbing settlement rules, confirmation cycles, and the small gaps where procedure thins. When he moved to the Delta desk in 2005, colleagues praised his diligence. Managers liked that he spoke little and stayed late. They called him Le Garçon Discret, the discreet boy, never guessing that discretion could shelter audacity. Kerviel's scheme hinged on the bank's own architecture. Each real trade produced a ticket. Each ticket required a matching counter trade or hedge. If a mismatch lingered past noon, alarms clanged. Kerviel learned to feed the system dummy tickets, supposed futures with Deutsche Bank or UBS, that balanced his true bets just long enough to survive overnight reconciliation. At dawn he deleted the phantoms, freeing capacity for new wagers before auditors arrived. The ploy was low-tech, almost pastoral, yet scale turned it nuclear. By Christmas 2007 his hidden exposure on European equity indices topped 50 billion euros, roughly the GDP of Slovakia. The market, indifferent to subterfuge, shifted against him as the subprime crisis seeped across the Atlantic. Kerviel doubled down, then tripled, convinced a rebound lay days away. Instead, the CAC 40 sagged like wet canvas. Unrealized losses silently crossed 1 billion euros, then 2 billion euros. On January 18th, a routine control team queried 3 odd reference numbers on his blotter. Kerviel, pulse throttling, invented a story about a pending hedge with a German fund. The controllers nodded but escalated. By Sunday night, internal investigators unlocked server logs and saw entire forests of cancelled trades sprouting and vanishing in milliseconds. At 1 a.m. Monday, Chief Executive Daniel Boughton convened an emergency meeting in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Seine. Risk officers laid out the verdict. SOCGen sat on one of the largest directional positions in history, unhedged and already underwater by billions. If word leaked, counterparties would hammer prices further. The only hope was speed. At dawn on January 21st, while Paris commuters sipped espresso, a secret sell-off began. Traders nicknamed it le déroule, the unwinding, moving chunks of futures through London, Frankfurt, and Chicago in parcels small enough to avoid rumor yet large enough to drain the reservoir before it burst. Global markets were already skittish. SOCGen's silent flood tipped them into panic. The CAC fell 6%, the DAX 7%, the Dow Jones opened to a 465-point plunge. By Thursday evening the Phantom Empire was gone, but not its residue. 4.9 billion euros in realized losses and a stain on the bank's red and black logo. SOCGen disclosed the disaster in a terse press release, blaming a single trader whose unauthorized activity had evaded controls. Journalists sensed scandal but struggled with the scale. Could one mid-level employee really gamble the equivalent of France's annual education budget? Kerviel was detained on a Sunday night, escorted past camera flashes into a gray Peugeot police van. He spoke softly during interrogation, admitting to fabricating hedges but rejecting the label of thief. "I never sought personal gain," he insisted. Indeed, his accounts showed modest bonuses, no villa, no yacht, only a small apartment in Neuilly and train tickets back to Brittany. He portrayed himself as a cog in a culture that worshipped profit yet shrouded risk metrics in talismanic jargon. Push the limits, supervisors said, so he did, further than imagination. SOCGen's leadership framed the narrative differently. A lone wolf breached robust defenses. Yet parliamentary hearings revealed those defenses were porous by design. Compliance teams were downsized to cut costs. Control software flagged anomalies but forwarded them to inboxes nobody checked after dusk. Kerviel had exploited not a glitch but a vacuum, the space where ambition outpaced vigilance. The trial opened in June 2010 beneath the vaulted ceilings of Paris's Palais de Justice. Prosecutors, armed with 44 leverage diagrams and 3,000 pages of chat logs, painted Kerviel as an industrializer of fraud. Defense counsel argued that superiors, thrilled by early profits, had turned a blind eye until losses metastasized. Spectators leaned forward when Kerviel described a manager slapping his back after a €500 million gain. "Carry on, you're on fire." The metaphor proved prophetic. The court delivered a thunderous sentence. 5 years, 2 suspended, and an order to repay the entire €4.9 billion, more a gesture than a possibility. Appeals whittled the penalty, but the image endured. A lone traitor dragging a century-old institution to the brink. Kerviel served 5 months, emerging to write memoirs and walk a penitential pilgrimage from Rome to Paris, denouncing the tyranny of finance. SOCGen, meanwhile, raised fresh capital from shareholders still dazed by the speed of demolition. Regulators rewrote the playbook. European banks introduced position caps that refresh in real time, segregation between trading and back-office functions hardened into algorithmic walls, and continuous audit bots combed transactions for patterns resembling Kerviel's deleted hedges. Yet veterans know software is only a century, complacency is the real adversary. Today, from the esplanade of La Défense, one can still see the glass towers where a quiet Breton once typed phantom codes under fluorescent hush. Office lights wink on at dusk as traders monitor indices that respond to crises born continents away. Somewhere among them may sit another discreet figure, praised for diligence, entrusted with small liberties that could, if unchecked, balloon into catastrophe. The ghost positions of 2008 linger in institutional memory, murmuring a single lesson through Parisian drizzle. Transparency is not a feature of systems but a habit of minds, and habits require constant human upkeep long after the software claims the job is done. London's dawn, pale as skimmed milk, seeped through the glass spires of Canary Wharf as the first currency traders took their desks. Screens clicked awake, flashing grids of futures prices and the tiny ubiquitous benchmark that underpinned them all, the London Interbank Offered Rate. Libor's numbers looked innocuous, 5 decimal places posted each morning at 11:45, but they quietly steered everything from student loans in Ohio to ship mortgages in Oslo. In theory, each bank reported the rate at which it could borrow unsecured cash that day. The panel's trimmed average became gospel before lunchtime. Miles away near Paddington, junior derivatives trader Tom Hayes, jacket off and ties askew, opened the group chat labeled Tokyo Wolves. He typed, "Need 3 million yen Libor low tomorrow, big fix. Can you guys help?" Across the city, a Barclays submitter named Danny Castle read the note and replied with a single winking emoji. The favor would cost nothing, promise far more. Libor manipulation had started small after the 2007 credit crunch. Market liquidity dried up, banks feared admitting high funding costs, and submitters massaged figures to project strength. What began as defensive posturing soon turned opportunistic. A pip nudge here, a few million yen there, enough to tip complex swaps into profit. Traders discovered that if several panel banks coordinated even slightly, they could shift the benchmark by a basis point, worth hundreds of thousands on their books. At the UK Financial Services Authority, junior analyst Sarah Price monitored daily submissions. She once loved how Libor resembled a clock, synchronized, impartial, silently trusted by the world. But a statistical anomaly kept blinking in her R-script plots. Barclays, UBS, and RBS moved in near-perfect formation ahead of major futures roll dates. Correlation was natural in crises, yet the pattern persisted after markets calmed. She saved the chart, titled it Strange Harmony, and forwarded it up the chain. Meanwhile, Hayes prepped for month-end. His desk at UBS had staked tens of millions on floating rate coupons tied to 3-month yen Libor. He rang another submitter in Zurich, voice casual. "We're good friends, yeah? Help me and I'll return the favor Thursday." The submitter chuckled. "Copy." Neither mentioned compliance lines. The call lasted 43 seconds. Inside Barclays' glass atrium that afternoon, Compliance Officer Jonathan Stone scanned chat transcripts during a routine e-discovery exercise. He paused at one string. "Come over for a steak, mate. Remember we need it low, low, low." Winky face. The counterparty, labeled Trader A, responded, "Done. For you, big boy." Stone flagged the conversation, but his manager, glancing at quarterly P&L surges, advised focusing on anti-money laundering priorities instead. The transcript was archived, unseen by regulators. Spring 2010 arrived with Athens riots and Eurozone trembles. Central banks slashed overnight rates. Libor should have drifted down. Yet on May 12 the yen panel ticked up, just enough to rescue Hayes' straddle trade. Champagne corks popped on the UBS floor at 4:05 p.m., the sound swallowed by the hum of Bloomberg terminals. Sarah Price, persistent, built a regression showing statistically impossible clustering around key derivative maturities. She requested subpoena power to obtain underlying chat logs. Her supervisor demurred, "We'd need political cover, banks will scream witch hunt." Sarah kept the file on her desktop, each day's update turning the plot darker. The break came from across the Atlantic. In Washington, the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission subpoenaed Barclays for unrelated swap data and stumbled upon flagged chats Stone had shelved. Algorithms scanned for keywords, low, high, fix, and lit up like fireworks. The CFTC looped in the FSA, which finally opened a formal probe. Sarah's strange harmony plot became Exhibit 1. June 27, 2012. Headlines blared, Barclays to pay £290 million over Libor rigging. CEO Bob Diamond, once the city's rock star, resigned within a week. Parliamentary hearings televised bankers' casual jokes. "We got the Libor set where we want it, mate." Spurring public outrage. Analysts recalculated the cost. Trillions of contracts tainted, municipal budgets skewed, pension funds shortchanged. Tom Hayes, now at Citigroup, saw the news scroll and felt a chill crawl up his spine. He texted an old colleague, "They're coming." Within months, he was arrested at Heathrow, later extradited to face trial as the scandal's first criminal test case. Prosecutors played jurors a montage of his chats, each line a breadcrumb. "If you keep 6M low today, I'll pay you with sushi." Hayes argued autism, social awkwardness, industry norms. Jurors took 9 days to convict. The judge, intent on deterrence, imposed a 14-year sentence, later reduced but still a warning bell echoing through dealing rooms worldwide. Regulators overhauled Libor governance, transferring administration to the Intercontinental Exchange and criminalizing misreporting. Yet the benchmark's credibility lay fractured beyond repair. By 2021, global authorities announced its sunset. A synthetic substitute would linger only for legacy contracts. The once mighty clock would be dismantled piece by piece. Sarah Price visited Canary Wharf that winter, watching cranes dismantle an old trading floor slated for conversion into flats. She thought about systems we trust, indexes, algorithms, numbers on screens imbued with authority because they appear each day at the same time. Remove honesty and precision turns to theater. The scandal's deepest lesson, she mused, was not about pips or spreadsheets but about silent assent. The way a market can drift from integrity when thousands decide a tiny nudge isn't truly wrong. Today, commuters ride the Jubilee line past the towers where submitters once tapped figures into Bloomberg IB screens at 11:10 a.m., guesses masquerading as fact. The new benchmarks, SOFR, SONIA, flicker overhead, fortified by transaction data and sterner laws. Yet every fresh fix carries a memory. Numbers, like clocks, tell the truth only when the people who set them choose not to lie. The heat of early July 2008 shimmered above 7th Avenue as commuters funneled into Lehman Brothers' Times Square Tower. In the glass-walled 28th floor Treasury Room, Managing Director Gerard Riley watched a spreadsheet populate in green. Repo 105, day-end balance $49.4 billion. He exhaled. If the figure printed exactly so in the upcoming quarterly report, Wall Street would read fortress liquidity and exhale too. The trick lay in the footnote nobody read, an accounting sleight of hand that shifted tens of billions off the balance sheet for exactly 10 days around each reporting date. Down on 24, senior accountant Matthew Lee frowned at the same number. 7 nights earlier he had combed through confirmations and noticed that the repos were not really short-term loans but temporary asset sales dressed up to look like cash financing. Because the collateral pledged exceeded 105% of borrowed funds, Lehman's auditors allowed it to be treated as a true sale, enabling the bank to tuck liabilities out of sight until the quarter closed. Lee felt the maneuver bent U.S. GAAP like a paperclip. He drafted a 5-page memo to the audit committee, titling it Possible Accelerated Balance Sheet Netting Issues. The language was cautious, the concern was existential. Meanwhile, on the executive floor, CFO Aaron Callan rehearsed talking points for analysts. We've reduced our net leverage from 32 to 24. The magic number would appear alongside calm bar charts and carefully lit photographs of trading screens. CEO Dick Fuld, sleeves crisp, nodded approval. He believed markets punished uncertainty above all. If leverage looked lower, capital would stay. July 9, 8:15 p.m., Matthew Lee slipped the memo under the door of the general counsel. He walked past cubicles where junior analysts still modeled commercial mortgage tranches that buyers no longer wanted. Behind him, the glow of terminals cast long green shadows. From afar, the floor resembled a forest lit by strange fireflies. The next morning, Lee was invited to a pre-audit alignment with Riley and 2 Ernst & Young partners. The mood was cordial until Lee cited paragraph 9 of FAS 140. Riley's smile thinned. One auditor said, "The transactions meet legal opinion thresholds. Let's not chase hypotheticals." Lee left the room trailing silence. Within a week he received notice that his position had been eliminated in a cost review. August brought storm clouds that refused to break. Lehman stock, once $80, clung near $16. Short sellers questioned opaque real estate marks. CNBC panel speculated on liquidity. Inside Treasury, Riley scheduled a fresh batch of repo 105s, codenamed Raven, to reduce quarter-end liabilities by another $32 billion. Barclays in London agreed to provide funding at 4%. In exchange, Lehman shipped over AAA-rated government bonds. A legal opinion from British firm Linklaters blessed the sale treatment. An opinion U.S. counsel would not issue, but British law sufficed for the footnote. September 7th, Treasury received news that Fannie and Freddie were heading into federal conservatorship. Bond spreads yawned. Repo counterparties began asking for more margin. Riley felt his margins of safety narrowing like alley walls. He called operations, "Push Raven earlier, have it off our books by the 10th. At 4:03 a.m. on September 8th, operations completed the wire transfer. Screens moments later showed cash inflows that made liquidity ratios sparkle. Callan, now replaced by Ian Lowett but still coaching from the sidelines, sent a note, "Good optics. Let's hold the line for earnings." Yet markets did not wait for optics. By Friday the 12th, rumor of a government-backed deal collapsed. Rating agencies threatened a downgrade. Repo lenders demanded haircuts Lehman could not post without recalling the very assets it had just sold. Riley stared at a blinking field. Required collateral, $7.2 billion, delivered by 1400 hours. But to return the collateral meant reversing repo 105s prematurely, which would balloon reported debt just as potential white knight Barclays poured over books. Catch-22 tightened like wire. That evening the Federal Reserve convened CEOs in a mahogany-paneled room at 33 Liberty. Fuld pleaded for bridge financing. Treasury Secretary Paulson remained unmoved. Across the table, J.P. Morgan's Jamie Dimon scrolled through internal risk memos flagging Lehman's off-balance sheet tricks. One banker whispered, "Their numbers don't foot." September 15 to 1:45 a.m. Midtown streets lay almost empty when Lehman's counsel filed for Chapter 11. Employees arriving at dawn found plywood over revolving doors and security guards handing out packets labeled separation information. In cubicles still warm from overnight traders, mugs sat half full, screens still logged in. The bronze bull on Fuld's desk, a gift from his first trading year, was packed into a banker's box. Weeks later, bankruptcy examiner Anton Valukas began sifting 350 million pages of emails, term sheets, and instant messages. He zeroed in on Riley's spreadsheets and Linklater's opinion. The final report, 2,200 pages long, devoted an entire volume to balance sheet manipulation under Repo 105, calling it a bright-line rule-driven device to window dress. Volukas singled out E&Y for failing to question why the transaction spiked only around reporting dates. Matthew Lee, no longer silenced by severance clauses, testified before Congress. He described being told the numbers were immaterial adjustments. Lawmakers brandished poster-sized graphs showing liabilities plunging days before quarter end, then surging back, like a scale that forgot your weight whenever the doctor glanced away. Ernst & Young paid $10 million to New York's Attorney General to settle allegations. Class action suits drained more. Dick Fuld, grilled on Repo 105, replied, "I was not aware of its accounting implications." Many found the answer colder than December wind that now whipped through empty floors once buzzing at 4 a.m. Today, the Times Square Tower houses a media startup. In a corner elevator shaft, faint adhesive outlines still spell "ouch." Tour guides rarely mention the vanished bank, but old traders passing by sometimes glance up at the 28th floor windows and remember those shining green cells, the numbers that balanced only because they were hidden on the other side of midnight. The lesson lingers like the echo of a closing service bell. Liquidity can be staged, leverage can be disguised, but sooner or later funding desks and repo counterparties call time. And a switch flipped for 10 days is still part of the clock every other day, proof that in finance the easiest numbers to fake are often the ones everyone most wants to believe. It was an ordinary gray morning in December 2008 when the receptionist at a Midtown Manhattan office noticed the stillness. Phones that usually rang off the hook lay mute. Market screens glowed with restless numbers, yet inside Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, silence pressed against the glass partitions as if someone had drawn a curtain over the noise of finance. At the center of this hush stood the firm's founder, Bernie Madoff, a silver-haired patriarch whose calm smile had reassured celebrities, charities, and pension trustees for decades. His reputation was titanium-clad. Nobody doubted the oracle of consistent double-digit returns. For years, postcards from grateful clients had decorated the hallway, pictures of college graduations, seaside retirements, medical research wings named in his honor. Madoff accepted the praise modestly, promising only that he would stick to the strategy. That strategy was never fully explained. If investors probed too deeply, he answered in the shorthand of an insider. Split-strike conversion, collars, market making, phrases that sounded sophisticated enough to end conversations. The charm was that he never seemed to need new money. New money came to him, delivered by friends of friends who had waited months for a coveted meeting. The operation itself looked simple. Upstairs, a legitimate market-making business bought and sold blue-chip stocks in real time. Downstairs, hidden behind a coded door marked 17th floor, stood a dimly lit enclave of antiquated IBM computers and dot matrix printers. Few employees ever entered that sanctum, and those who did kept their heads down, inputting numbers from a script. Each month they printed thousands of account statements, stuffing envelopes late into the night. The statements showed trades that had never occurred, dates that conjured profits out of thin air. Yet the columns of neatly typed figures made every investor feel wise for having trusted the maestro. Among them was a French aristocrat whose family trust had survived 2 world wars. Another was a hospital foundation in Iowa, its endowment responsible for neonatal incubators that now bore Madoff's name. They all enjoyed the same rhythm. A check mailed in January, a statement in February reflecting a small but steady rise, the reassurance that their capital was intact and growing. No alarms, no drama, no ugly peaks or valleys, just a gentle upward slope, like the quiet path of a glider on a clear day. That tranquility began to fracture in the autumn of 2008. The global credit crunch had shredded balance sheets from Iceland to Indiana, and even the most stoic investors felt tremors of fear. Redemption requests trickled into Madoff's office, at first politely phrased, then tinged with urgency. Clients needed cash to cover losses elsewhere. Madoff waved away concerns in his usual velvet tone. Everything was liquid, everything was fine. But the redemption pile grew taller, and the incoming wire transfers slowed to a drip. On December 9th, 2 of Madoff's senior employees, the trusted Lieutenant Frank D. Pascali and Madoff's own sons, Mark and Andrew, sat across from him in his penthouse living room. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the windows overlooking Lexington Avenue. Inside, Madoff's voice was barely above a whisper as he confessed, "It's all one big lie. The portfolio did not exist. The $65 billion in reported assets was an apparition stitched together by those ancient printers downstairs. All that remained was roughly $300 million in the bank, not nearly enough to repay the billions requested." The next morning, Madoff told his longtime lawyer to arrange a meeting with federal agents. By evening, FBI agents knocked on his apartment door. When they asked whether there was an innocent explanation, Madoff replied simply, "There is no innocent explanation." Handcuffs clicked shut, echoing like the clasp on an empty vault. News of the arrest spread faster than any market rumor. Some investors felt disbelief, others rage. One philanthropist stared at the statement on his desk, still warm from the plastic window of that month's envelope, realizing the numbers were fantasies. A widow in Palm Beach called her accountant and learned her life savings had evaporated overnight. Trust, an asset once considered priceless, had been traded away for illusions stamped on dot matrix paper. In the weeks that followed, forensic accountants combed through boxes of records, reconstructing cash flows with the precision of archaeologists dusting off ruins. They discovered that Madoff had never bought the long positions listed on his client's statements. Instead, new deposits paid earlier investors, a classic Ponzi conveyor belt hidden beneath layers of convivial small talk and exclusive access. Victims compared notes and found a perverse symmetry. The strategy that seemed conservatively brilliant was, in fact, unimaginably reckless. In March 2009, Madoff stood before Judge Denny Chin in a packed federal courtroom. Dozens of victims filled the wooden benches, clutching letters describing lost retirements and derailed scholarships. Madoff, once the embodiment of Wall Street serenity, now appeared frail, his tailored suit hanging loose. He spoke without theatrics, accepting guilt on 11 counts of fraud, money laundering, and perjury. "I am painfully aware," he said, "that I have deeply hurt many people." His composure cracked only when he faced his wife Ruth, seated behind the bar, her eyes fixed on the floor. The sentence, 150 years, landed like a gavel made of iron. Yet the larger reckoning went beyond a single man. Regulators faced congressional interrogations about missed red flags. Banks scrambled to explain why compliance officers had waved through transactions that smelled odd in retrospect. Charities learned the fragility of concentration risk. Even ordinary savers looked at their monthly statements with fresh skepticism, reminded that glowing numbers are only as solid as the ethics behind them. Years later, after Madoff's death in prison, the abandoned 17th floor rooms were photographed for the record. Dust covered the IBM terminals. Stacks of pre-printed trade tickets remained in neat rows, as if awaiting time travelers. In the quiet, one could almost hear the phantom hum of those dot matrix printers that once manufactured confidence line by line. The ghostly machinery stood as a monument to a simple truth. Faith in returns, untested by scrutiny, can be the easiest currency to counterfeit. The receptionist who noticed the first eerie silence returned once, escorted by marshals to collect personal items. She paused at the doorway where postcards had once hung. The walls were bare, the memories repossessed by investigators. In that emptiness lay the final lesson of the greatest investment hoax in American history. Even the most comforting stories, when built on lies, vanish without leaving footprints, save for the chill that lingers in the wake of their collapse. The morning air in Munich carried a quiet confidence in June 2020. Bicycle bells chimed along Maximilianstrasse, and in the glass tower on Einstein Ring, Wirecard AG prepared for what was meant to be a routine triumph. The publication of an audit that would silence critics and propel the payments company into the rarefied league of European tech giants. Inside the sleek lobby, employees swiped RFID badges past a brushed steel turnstile embossed with the company's motto, "The Future of Payment." On the fourth floor, CEO Marcus Braun adjusted his black turtleneck, a uniform that signaled both discipline and visionary flair. He had persuaded German regulators, blue-chip banks, and even the government itself that Wirecard's digital wallet and prepaid cards were reshaping commerce from Berlin kiosks to Bangkok street markets. Investors treated him like Europe's answer to Silicon Valley royalty, bidding the firm's valuation north of 24 billion euros. Yet a faint tremor shook the conference rooms that day, a curt email from EY, the external auditor. They could not sign off on the 2019 accounts. Two Asian trustee banks said to be safeguarding 1.9 billion euros in cash would not confirm the balances. Finance chief Jan Marsalek, a suave Austrian whose grin rarely slipped, advised patience. Philippine time zones, he suggested, caused the delay. But in the boardroom's hushed atmosphere, the explanation felt brittle, like porcelain held too tightly. Braun convened a video call with Marsalek, who appeared from an undisclosed location, blinds drawn. He spoke of couriered documents, missing seals, and a bank officer on holiday. To soothe tempers, he produced a PDF purporting to show the cash safely parked in escrow accounts at BDO Unibank in Manila. The directors nodded, but a chill lingered. 4 months, the Financial Times had published investigative pieces alleging round-tripped revenue and phantom customers. Wirecard dismissed the reports as defamation, even hiring private detectives to shadow journalists. Now, however, the numbers themselves threatened to defect. 2 days later, EY confirmed the worst. The 1.9 billion euros probably did not exist. Braun stared at the auditor's wording, not ascertainable, as if the phrase were written in an unfamiliar dialect. Within hours, he stepped into a neutral-toned press room, cameras clicking. His voice remained level, but his eyes flitted toward exits. At present, he declared, we must assume that the escrow accounts do not contain the balances shown. The share price collapsed in real time, spiraling from 100 euros to single digits like an elevator cable snapping. Employees watched the ticker in disbelief. A software engineer who had relocated from Spain opened her paystub portal, wondering whether her next salary would clear. A receptionist answered calls from pensioners who had invested life savings, their questions tumbling over one another. Can I sell? Is it too late? She offered scripted sympathy, then muted the line to steady her breathing. Meanwhile, Marsalek vanished into thin air. Rumors placed him first in Manila, then Minsk. Later whispers spoke of a Russian safe house near Moscow's Vnukovo airport. Investigators traced his last known movements. A private jet from Klagenfurt, a passport stamped in Belarus, and a flurry of encrypted messages to numbers linked with former intelligence operatives. His sudden disappearance lent the unfolding scandal a cloak and dagger aura rarely seen in corporate fraud. Munich prosecutors raided Wirecard headquarters, seizing laptops and hard drives. In open-plan spaces once humming with coding sprints, agents in latex gloves sifted through binders labeled "Acquiring Asia" and "Third-party partners." The so-called partners often led to mailboxes above convenience stores in Singapore or to shell entities in the British Virgin Islands. Money appeared to ricochet between them in looping circuits, inflating sales each time it bounced. Like stage magicians, Braun and Marsalek had built a hall of mirrors where €1 became €3, then €10, provided no one turned on the house lights. By night, anxious employees gathered in beer gardens along the Isar River, trading rumors over half-finished masquerade. One developer recalled an internal ticket he filed months earlier. A phantom merchant ID processing millions in daily volume yet generating no customer support logs. The ticket had been closed without comment. Another recounted compliance reports in which transaction timestamps leapt backwards, as if hours had been rewound to keep revenue meters spinning. They realized the mosaic of anomalies formed a single image only now coming into view. On June 25, Wirecard filed for insolvency, Germany's first DAX-listed company ever to do so. Shareholders, regulators, even Chancellor Angela Merkel, who had lobbied for Wirecard in China only the previous year, confronted the same question. How had oversight mechanisms slept? BaFin, the financial watchdog, had focused its energy on prosecuting short sellers rather than scrutinizing Wirecard's books. Now the agency faced its own reckoning, summoned before a parliamentary committee searching for answers in a tangle of missed signals. Braun was arrested, released on bail, re-arrested, and finally placed in pretrial detention after prosecutors deemed flight risk inevitable. In the sterile light of Stadelheim prison, stripped of smartphone and signature turtleneck, he contemplated ledgers that once glowed green on PowerPoint slides. He maintained that he too had been deceived, portraying Marsalek as the rogue conductor of off-balance sheet fraud. But investigators unearthed emails suggesting Braun had approved backdated contracts and pressured subordinates to close the gap when genuine sales lagged behind targets. Forensic accountants pieced together the life cycle of the missing billions. Funds borrowed from banks were wired to trustee accounts, photographed to produce convincing audit confirmations, then swiftly rerouted to settle previous debts. Like water in a leaking bucket, the cash never stayed put long enough to count. What remained after the carousel stopped were markers, not money. Months later, Philip Hildebrand, a seasoned observer of European finance, commented that Wirecard had been a tech company with the governance of a street vendor. The phrase stuck because it captured the paradox: cutting-edge payment APIs masking medieval bookkeeping. Investors who once celebrated Europe's fintech champion wrote off their stakes. Some retirees downsized apartments, their nest eggs erased by a finger's tap on a spreadsheet. In the chill of an autumn evening, a lone security guard patrolled the empty Wirecard campus. Neon logos had been pried from facades, leaving ghostly outlines in the concrete. In an abandoned cafeteria, glossy brochures still promised frictionless commerce in 15 languages. He picked one up, noting the slogan, "Trust us with your money, we'll take you further." Folding the pamphlet, he switched off the light and locked the door, leaving behind a lesson as blunt as the silence in the halls. When numbers soar too smoothly and scrutiny is treated as sabotage, even the future of payment can dissolve into a vanishing act. The twin glass towers rising over Smith Street shimmered like a mirage against the Texas sky in the spring of 2001. From a distance, the Enron logo, 3 bright blue slashes twisted into an improbable E, looked as durable as any oil derrick that had ever dotted the prairie. Inside, traders in crisp shirts paced a football field-sized hall known simply as the box, where electricity, natural gas, and bandwidth contracts flashed red and green on wall-length screens. The soundtrack was perpetual applause, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the occasional whoop when a deal settled at a sliver of profit. In the executive suite 31 floors up, Jeffrey Skilling straightened his tie and scanned the latest earnings release. The numbers sang: revenue up, margins resilient, a future brighter than the noon sun outside. Analysts would call the quarter a masterpiece. Television hosts would repeat the phrase, the world's most innovative company. Skilling allowed himself a small smile. He had replaced the old commodity world with a new idea, turning energy into something abstract that could be bought and sold like stock. The more opaque the valuation, the more dazzling the headline. The alchemy rested on a labyrinth of partnerships with whimsical names: Raptors, Chuko, Jedi, LGM. In windowless rooms, accountants routed liabilities into these entities the way a magician palms a coin. Losses that should have dragged earnings into the red were whisked away, leaving only ascending lines on investor slides. Whenever a balance threatened to tip, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Fastow conjured another partnership, like adding a new wall to hold back rising water. The trick worked as long as banks kept lending and auditors kept nodding. But a quiet skeptic monitored the show. Sharon Watkins, a vice president with a tidy desk and a reputation for unvarnished questions, noticed a figure in the latest spreadsheet that refused to reconcile. A partnership reported equity growth that exceeded its assets by the exact amount of a recently transferred loss. She traced the entry through layers of ledgers until the trail dead-ended at a line labeled, "Guaranteed by Enron stock." It dawned on her that the company's soaring share price was the keystone. If it ever sagged, the arch would crumble. Watkins penned a memo to Skilling, couched in cautious language. "I am nervous," she wrote, "that we will implode in a wave of accounting scandals." She expected either gratitude or rebuke. Instead, her note was met with a corporate shrug, an invitation to meet, a promise to review, then silence. The trading floor resumed its frenzy. The stock price climbed another few dollars. Yet the memo lingered like a hairline crack in tempered glass. Over the summer, a darker wind swept the market. California's rolling blackouts, the dot-com crash, and murmurs about the Federal Reserve tightening credit shook investor faith. Enron shares, once above $90, slipped below $60. That single-digit change mattered. Many partnership guarantees would activate if the price closed under $50. Fastow convened emergency calls with bankers to renegotiate covenants. His tone remained breezy, but perspiration dotted his collar. He reassured lenders that Enron's risk models were bulletproof. Few noticed that each call ended with a new plea for short-term cash. In October, an analyst on a group conference call asked Skilling a simple question: "How exactly does Enron make its money?" The line crackled as though embarrassed. Skilling's reply, "Where the good guys rip, mix, and burn," elicited polite laughter, but the analyst pressed again. Frustration flickered across Skilling's face. He muttered under his breath, thinking the microphone muted. What in? The insult leaked, joining a chorus of doubts. That afternoon, the Wall Street Journal published an article titled, "Is Enron Enigmatic or Endangered?" The stock dipped below $40. Auditors from Arthur Andersen arrived to review the third quarter results. They found a stack of off-balance sheet obligations that dwarfed the company's reported profits. Fasto argued they were hedged. The lead auditor hesitated, careers and client fees balanced on his clipboard. In the end, Andersen signed, but the signature trembled. Weeks later, the firm would shred thousands of Enron documents in locked conference rooms, the pages fed into whirring machines like dry leaves into a bonfire. On November 8, Enron stunned Wall Street with a sudden $613 million loss and an admission that $1.2 billion of shareholder equity had evaporated through structured transactions. Trading screens once alive with color went dark as counterparties halted deals, demanding cash collateral. Liquidity, that invisible oxygen, escaped the room. By Thanksgiving, the share price resembled an elevator in free fall, $10, $5, $1. Employees who had maxed out 401(k)s on company stock refreshed browser windows in disbelief. Some hauled cardboard boxes past the lobby waterfall, carrying years of service in 2 armfuls. The towers themselves seemed to groan. Maintenance crews reported flickering lights, stuttering elevators, water pipes rattling with no evident cause. It felt as though the building understood the deception woven into its steel frame and was rattling in protest. On December 2nd, Enron filed for Chapter 11, the largest bankruptcy in American history at the time. Court dockets filled with names. Utilities, pension funds, Silicon Valley startups that had hedged bandwidth on Enron's fabled trading platform. Each sought answers, but the paper trail was a maze. Investigators likened it to chasing cats through smoke-filled corridors. Every tunnel ended at another shell company, another guarantee circling back to stock that was now worthless. Congress convened hearings. Skilling, Fasto, and founder Ken Lay faced rows of microphones, their sworn testimonies punctuated by flashes of camera bulbs. Lay declared he wanted the truth as much as anyone. Skilling invoked Fifth Amendment rights more often than he answered. Fasto, looking suddenly small behind the witness table, admitted to errors. The word felt absurdly modest for the billions erased. In the months that followed, the partnerships collapsed like empty tin cans. Jurors heard tapes of traders joking about Grandma Millie paying higher utility bills. Skilling received 24 years, Fasto 6. Lay died before sentencing. Arthur Andersen, once a pillar of the auditing world, dissolved into memory. The towers on Smith Street still stand, leased to other tenants, their mirrored skins reflecting Houston's restless clouds. Passers-by scarcely pause, yet those who remember can almost feel the hum that once radiated through the glass. An energy not of electricity or gas, but of collective faith in numbers that never existed. On certain evenings, when the sun sets at just the right angle, the blue E outline faintly reappears, like a watermark on paper held up to light. It is a ghostly reminder that optimism, unchecked by scrutiny, can build an empire out of nothing more substantial than the glare of a Gulf Coast sunset. Morning fog hugged the hills above Palo Alto on a September day in 2013 as employees streamed into the minimalist glass headquarters of Theranos Incorporated. Sunlight bounced off white corridors lined with slogans, "Believe in miracles," and "One drop changes everything." In her corner office, CEO Elizabeth Holmes adjusted the black turtleneck that had become her armor. Barely 30, she was already hailed as the next Steve Jobs, promising to replace vials of blood with a single finger stick. Venture capitalists had poured hundreds of millions into the company. Walgreens had agreed to install tiny testing centers beside its pharmacy counters. Magazine covers framed Holmes with headlines that glowed like neon, "Youngest self-made female billionaire." Yet beneath the bright veneer lingered the thrum of unease. In Lab A, technicians monitored sleek devices called Edison boxes, dark, shoebox-sized machines whose secrets were guarded more carefully than any patent. The devices hummed, lights flickering as if performing complex chemistry. Only a handful of engineers knew the truth. Inside, conventional blood analyzers were jury-rigged with tubing and duct tape, struggling to run panels never designed for such tiny samples. Errors popped up in red text on hidden screens, then disappeared under command line keystrokes. When results contradicted reality, protocols instructed staff to dilute samples, rerun tests, or, if the numbers still refused to cooperate, blame user error. Ian Gibbons, a veteran biochemist, had whispered concerns to colleagues. The math of microfluidics did not add up. He was told to trust the vision. Erica Chung, a young lab associate, noticed that quality control flags, little yellow triangles, outnumbered green checks. She emailed her supervisor, attaching screenshots. The reply arrived minutes later: "Do not send quality data over email. Delete immediately." She clicked delete but pressed print first, slipping the pages into a folder she kept at home. In conference rooms, Holmes delivered her story with hypnotic certainty. She lowered her voice, widened her eyes, and spoke of her uncle's death from cancer. How a cheaper, faster blood test might have saved him. Potential investors leaned in, captivated by the overlap of profit and moral crusade. When one asked for validation studies, Holmes countered with urgency. Every day spent in peer review, she said, was another day patients suffered. Her board of directors, retired generals, former secretaries of state, nodded gravely. They received glossy reports showing accuracy within FDA ranges, printed on thick paper with crimson borders. None of them were scientists. Meanwhile, the Walgreens pilot entered full bloom. Patients in Phoenix pricked their fingers beneath a bright Theranos logo, then watched the scant drop of blood vanish into a tiny vial called the nanotainer. Results promised in 4 hours often arrived 2 days later. A nurse practitioner noticed cholesterol readings ping-ponging for the same patient, first normal, then dangerously low, then absurdly high. When she called the helpline, a calm voice thanked her for her feedback and invited her to resubmit the sample free of charge. The first tremor reached headquarters in late 2014. The Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou requested comment on an upcoming article questioning Theranos technology. Meetings turned feverish. Chief Operating Officer Sunny Balwani paced, fists clenched, insisting the company sue for defamation. Holmes agreed. Legal letters flew across Manhattan news desks, bristling with phrases like trade secrets and reckless disregard. Yet inside the labs, the hush deepened. One engineer, summoned to rewrite analyzer code overnight, found Sunny peering over his shoulder until dawn, muttering, "Failure is not an option." Carreyrou's story landed like a thunderclap in October 2015. Most tests were being run on traditional Siemens machines, not the vaunted Edison devices. Proficiency scores lagged, results were unreliable. Holmes appeared on CNBC hours later, dismissing the article as the work of a very male reporter who did not understand innovation. Investors, unsettled but not yet certain, clung to her charisma. The valuation still hovered near $9 billion. After all, disruption often faced resistance. Federal regulators, however, required more than persuasion. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services inspected the Newark, California lab early in 2016. They found refrigerator temperatures unlogged, calibration records missing, and clotting factors measured on devices that had never been validated for coagulation tests. A supervisor tried to explain away a spreadsheet column labeled "doctoring," claiming it meant documenting. The inspectors remained stone-faced. Weeks later, CMS issued a scathing 33-page report and proposed a 2-year ban on Holmes and Balwani from owning or operating a lab. The spell finally cracked. Walgreens suspended its partnership. Partner clinics pulled down Theranos signage overnight, leaving pale rectangles on store walls. Journalists camped outside the company's doors. Inside, rows of Edison boxes sat idle, their indicator lights off like eyes closed in shame. Employees collected personal items in cardboard trays, sidestepping pallets of unused nanotainers destined for biohazard disposal. Civil lawsuits multiplied, patients alleging misdiagnosis, investors citing fraud. In 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Holmes and Balwani with an elaborate, years-long fraud. The indictment revealed doctored Pfizer logos on validation reports, revenue forecasts inflated 20-fold, and emails instructing staff to delete raw data before demos. Holmes settled, relinquishing control, though she denied wrongdoing. Balwani prepared for court, vowing to fight. By autumn, Theranos was no more than paperwork in a bankruptcy court. The gleaming headquarters went quiet. Echoing corridors smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale ambition. Auctioneers cataloged equipment: centrifuges, microscopes, office desks. The Edison machines were listed as non-functional prototypes. One bitter joked they might fetch value as conversation pieces, modern relics of belief outrunning biology. In San Jose's federal courthouse, Holmes eventually took the stand, her voice softer than in the old keynote videos. She spoke of good intentions, the barriers women face, the moonshot culture of Silicon Valley. Prosecutors responded by projecting lab emails on a screen. Failed quality controls, ignored alarms, patients with false HIV positives. Jurors watched word by word. The verdict, guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, arrived after 7 days of deliberation. Sentencing would come later, but the judgment in public memory was immediate. Today, the former Walgreens kiosk in Phoenix sells flu shots. Few customers notice the patched holes where the Theranos banner once hung. Yet if someone looks closely, a faint outline of the logo, a stylized droplet inside a square, emerges like an old scar. It whispers the caution etched into every corner of medical history: the body does not negotiate with slogans or valuations. In the end, a single drop of blood told the truth Holmes tried so hard to rewrite, staining the Silicon dream with a shade no marketing miracle could bleach away. A pale dawn settled over Wolfsburg in May 2014 as engineers filed through Gate 17 of Volkswagen's colossal headquarters. Inside Building 90, a prototype Golf idled on a dynamometer, its tailpipe tethered to slender hoses that vanished into a cabinet of sensors. The test cell's air felt oddly perfumed, no acrid sting, no grime on technicians' gloves. Supervisor Oliver Schmidt frowned. Diesel exhaust was never this clean. Yet the laptop graphed flat, compliant lines of nitrogen oxides, well below the U.S. standard that most European diesels struggled to meet. Half a world away in West Virginia, researchers at the little-known International Council on Clean Transportation were packing for a road trip. They planned to drive 2 clean diesel Volkswagens and a BMW from San Diego to Seattle, gathering emissions data in real-world traffic. The project was modest, its budget barely enough for gas, motels, and burritos. But if the cars proved as green on highways as they did in labs, regulators might relax rules and diesel could gain a foothold in America. That was the idea, simple, even optimistic. After 1,300 miles, the optimism curdled. On climbs through Big Sur and descents into Oregon pine valleys, the Volkswagens emitted up to 35 times the legal NOx limit. The BMW stayed within bounds. Convinced their sensors were faulty, the students recalibrated and drove back south. The results held: Jekyll and Hyde cars, angelic in the lab, poisonous on the road. A quiet alarm bell began to ring. Meanwhile, in Wolfsburg, software team lead Axel E., known for his meticulous notebooks, received a terse email: ensure acoustic function not detectable. The acoustic function, he knew, was the defeat device hidden deep in engine control code. It compared steering angle, barometric pressure, speed, and duration to a signature pattern: stationary front wheels, rear spinning, a lab test. When those clues aligned, the program flipped to dyno mode, dialing back fuel and throttling exhaust. Outside that envelope, it reopened valves, preserving engine pep at the cost of spewing NOx. The cheat had started almost a decade earlier, a quick fix after engineers realized the new EA189 engine could not hit the stringent American standard without costly hardware. A senior manager allegedly muttered, "We must not lose the US launch." That phrase became mantra. Each model year the code was tweaked, cloaked, renamed. Nobody wrote "defeat device" in an email again. Instead they called it the switch, the auxiliary emission strategy, or most cryptically, ECD number 23. In early 2015, the West Virginia team presented its baffling findings to the California Air Resources Board, CRB. Regulators assumed a recall or minor fix would follow. Volkswagen's American engineers, blindsided, conferred with headquarters. Official responses cited unexpected driving conditions, poor diesel quality, perhaps customer modifications. Letters grew longer, explanations thinner. CARB's patience wore through. They threatened to withhold certification for the upcoming model year unless VW found the specific technical cause. Pressure tunneled through the hierarchy to a conference room in Wolfsburg one sweltering July afternoon. Documents later revealed an engineer warned, "We have a software-based defeat device." Silence pooled around the table. Another voice asked, "Can we calibrate out of this?" A grim shake of the head. "Hardware fix only, roughly €300 per car, 11 million cars." The numbers spiraled. Billions in retooling, billions in fines, the brand's immaculate efficiency myth shattered. Yet the meeting adjourned without resolution. Executives dispersed, hoping perhaps for a loophole or diplomatic solution. That hope died on September 3, 2015, when VW officials met CARB and the Environmental Protection Agency in an anonymous gray building near LAX. Across a laminate table, regulators repeated their question. This time VW's emissaries conceded. Yes, their diesels contained undisclosed software that altered emissions during testing. One EPA lawyer pushed her glasses up, scribbled a note and closed the file. The meeting ended in 14 minutes. News broke 2 weeks later. Headlines coined a single, indelible word: Dieselgate. Volkswagen stock lost a third of its value in days. In Wolfsburg's town square, workers in blue coveralls stared at outdoor screens broadcasting the CEO's apology. Martin Winterkorn, famed for micro-inspecting door seams with a ruler, now spoke in a tremor, "I am endlessly sorry." He resigned 48 hours later. Inside plant cafeterias, rumors raced faster than assembly robots. Would U.S. sales cease? Would the fabled Jobs for Life pact with German unions crack? Some workers felt betrayed. Others whispered that the trickery was an industry open secret. Still, the scale stunned everyone. Engines in Golfs, Passats, Audis, even a Porsche SUV, vehicles parked in driveways from Michigan to Madrid, all carrying a lie under their hoods. Investigations swarmed. The U.S. Department of Justice filed criminal charges. The FBI arrested Oliver Schmidt at a Miami airport as he prepared to fly home from vacation. German prosecutors raided executive villas at dawn, seizing laptops and leather-bound planners. Software logs revealed expletive-laced chats the night Dyno Mode first went live. One read simply, "We'll get away with it, L." Volkswagen pleaded guilty, agreeing to pay $25 billion in buybacks, repairs, and penalties in the United States alone. Tens of thousands of cars were herded to desert lots, neat rows of mechanical contrition visible from satellites. Engineers drafted fixes that added urea tanks and reprogrammed engines, trading horsepower for legality. Customers grumbled about sluggish acceleration. Environmental groups argued the cars should have been scrapped. In 2020, Winterkorn and 4 others were charged in Germany with organized commercial fraud. Court delays and appeals stretched on, but the cultural verdict had already landed. Diesel, once trumpeted as Europe's ecological stepping stone, saw its market share plummet. Cities from Paris to Hamburg announced future bans. Today, the Wolfsburg test cell still hums, though protocols have multiplied like safety locks. A red sign above the dynamometer reads, "Verify all modes." New engineers receive a 3-hour ethics briefing before they touch a line of code. In a glass display case near the main lobby sits a single catalytic converter warped by excessive heat, an artifact of the scandal. A plaque beneath states, "Trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and an eternity to repair." Commuters crossing the Midland Canal at dusk can see the 4 iconic VW smokestacks lit crimson against the low sky. Their reflections ripple in the water, wavering with every gust. An apt mirror for a company and an industry still trying to steady themselves after realizing that, sometimes, the cleanest-looking smoke is only hiding the darkest fire. Morning mist drifted over the Po Valley on December 18, 2003, settling like fine lace on the tiled roofs of Collecchio. Inside Parma's gleaming headquarters of Parmalat Spa, clerks hurried along corridors scented faintly of warm milk and espresso. Posters of smiling toddlers clutching cartons hung beside framed magazine covers proclaiming the company a global nutrition champion. For years, founder Callisto Tanzi had portrayed the dairy conglomerate as Italy's answer to Nestle, expanding from UHT milk to fruit juice, yogurt, even Brazilian soccer rights. Bankers called him Il Mago, the magician, because profits appeared as reliably as dawn over the Apennines. That morning, however, the spell was faltering. In conference room Verdi, Chief Financial Officer Fausto Tana sat before a speakerphone linked to Bank of America's Dublin branch. The agenda sounded routine. Confirm a €3.9 billion balance in a Cayman Islands subsidiary named Bonlat. Auditors from Grant Thornton waited, pencils poised. An Irish clerk came on the line, polite but puzzled. After checking Swift codes and account numbers, he offered a small cough. "I'm sorry, but we have no record of any such deposit." Silence thickened. Tana's pen clicked twice. He asked the clerk to look again. The reply, firmer now, was the same. No funds, no Bonlat account. The call ended. One auditor exhaled as if leaving a cold theater. Tana gathered his papers and left the room without fastening his briefcase. Down the hall, Tansy kept journalists occupied with holiday pleasantries, promising a new line of calcium-enriched milk for generations to come. The doubt seated in Verdi grew quickly. Grant Thornton demanded original bank confirmations. Tansy produced a fax. Bonlat letterhead, Cayman address, figures precise to the cent. But the formatting felt odd, logos slightly blurred. A junior auditor Googled the fax number. It linked to a photocopy shop in Parma. The auditor raised a hand. "Signore, this looks homemade." For nearly a decade, Parmalat had woven an intricate web of shell companies spanning Luxembourg, the Netherlands, the Caribbean, and South America. Debt traveled the web like a bead on a rosary, passed, prayed over, passed again, until its origin was untraceable. Each quarter, Bonlat dutifully reported robust cash reserves, offsetting heavy borrowing elsewhere. Ratings agencies, soothed by the liquidity, assigned investment-grade scores. Italian pension funds bought Parmalat bonds. Shopkeepers in Siena placed savings in safe, yield-boosting notes. Even the Vatican's investment arm held a slice. Inside the Treasury office, spreadsheets bore color codes. Green for real cash, amber for intercompany loans, red for special-purpose assets. Over time, red shaded almost everything, yet monthly reports to investors glowed entirely green, as if the palette had been inverted. When junior accountants questioned disparities, senior managers invoked dual materiality, a phrase that sounded authoritative but meant nothing. Those who pressed harder were reassigned to distant plants in Sicily or Brazil, promotions wrapped around exile. The crisis ripened in late afternoon when Parmalat's primary bank syndicate refused to roll over a looming €150 million bond. Tansy summoned directors to the top-floor boardroom under a chandelier shaped like a cluster of grapes. He spoke softly, eyes on the polished table, admitting that the Bonlat cash was temporarily inaccessible. That phrase, too, rang hollow. Directors began to realize the truth might be terminal, not temporary. Italian market regulators, Consub, froze trading in Parmalat shares the next day. Television anchors interrupted soap operas to broadcast images of employees streaming out of milk processing plants, factory sirens still wailing. In village groceries from Turin to Taranto, elderly shoppers stared at shelves stacked with Parmalat cartons and asked whether the milk inside was now tainted by fraud. Prosecutors in Milan moved swiftly. At dawn on December 27th, Guardia di Finanza officers arrived at Tansy's stucco villa. Snow dusted the hedges as they escorted the 65-year-old magnate, scarf draped neatly over his coat collar, into an unmarked car. Cameras flashed. A reporter shouted, "Callisto Dovsono I soldi? Where is the money?" Tansy lowered his gaze. The car drove off. Auditors unraveling the accounts found invoices for imaginary shipments, circular loans bouncing among subsidiaries, and a complex instrument nicknamed the Buco Nero, the black hole, which absorbed losses by booking them as assets to be realized upon maturity of strategic initiatives. In plain language, the company had recorded vacuum as value. The gap ultimately measured €14 billion, more than the annual budget of several Italian ministries. Bondholders convened emergency meetings in Rome hotels, calculations scrolling on projector screens like medical charts of a fading patient. Recovery prospects dimmed by the hour. One retiree remarked that her nest egg had turned to ricotta overnight, soft, formless, unrecoverable. Tana turned state witness, describing secret meetings where executives practiced forged signatures on translucent paper held against real bank letters. He recalled a night flight to Caracas, hand-carrying falsified certificates because couriers might peek. His testimony painted Tansy not as an absent-minded patriarch but as the orchestra's conductor, choosing each deceptive note. In 2008, after labyrinthine trials, Tansy received a 10-year prison sentence for market manipulation, later extended to 18 for bankruptcy fraud. He spent his final years under house arrest, strolling a modest garden within sight of factories that once bottled 1 billion liters annually. Tana served a shorter term, emerging with a memoir title in mind but no publisher. Grant Thornton's Italian arm dissolved. Regulators tightened audit rules, though skeptics noted the barn doors closed long after the cows had vanished. Parmalat itself survived, sold in 2011 to France's Lactalis, its iconic blue and yellow sun logo largely unchanged. Trucks still rumble across the plains before dawn, collecting milk from family farms. Yet older drivers remember the winter the tankers almost stopped. They recall how trust, like fresh cream, sours invisibly, one day sweet, the next curdled beyond saving. In Colecchio Central Square, an abstract bronze sculpture of a milk splash stands as corporate art. Children climb it in summer, unaware of its darker resonance. But when fog settles thick over the valley and the bells of San Prospero toll evening mass, locals say you can smell a faint tang in the air, as though the earth itself still exhales the spoiled breath of the biggest accounting fraud Europe had ever tasted. Kenneth Lay's corner office on the 50th floor of Houston's Enron Center glimmered with river light, a silver ribbon winding south toward Galveston. Visitors sat across from him, hypnotized by the view while he spoke of a future where gas flowed like data. Efficient, instantaneous, profitable each time it changed hands. They left believing Enron wasn't merely an energy company, it was the operating system of commerce itself. 3 floors below, a slender accountant named Sharon Watkins studied a spreadsheet whose sums refused to settle. The line item was called Raptors, a friendly nickname masking hundreds of millions in obligations tucked inside partnerships with whimsical names: LJM, Choco, Whitewing. The cells glowed green, yet the cash behind them seemed to hover like mirage water over hot asphalt. Watkins printed the file, circled 2 columns, and slipped the pages into her bag, unease spreading through her chest like slow ink. That same evening, CFO Andrew Fasto led bankers from Chase and Merrill through a private tour of Enron's trading floor. Rows of curved monitors displayed real-time prices for electricity, bandwidth, even weather futures. Traders in headsets barked buy or sell orders as if conducting invisible orchestras. Fasto pointed to a wall of graphs climbing steadily upward. "Volatility is opportunity," he told the bankers, voice smooth as oiled gears. The bankers nodded, their own bonuses already mapping themselves in the mind. Weeks later, journalist Bethany McLean dialed Enron's investor relations hotline from a cramped cubicle at Fortune magazine. She had one simple question: how exactly does Enron make its money? The spokesman's answer wandered through jargon, arbitrage capture, regulatory optimization, without ever landing. McLean hung up, eyebrows knitting. She opened Enron's latest 10K filing. Footnotes sprawled for pages, a thicket of entities blooming offshore. She began marking them with sticky flags, pink for partnerships, yellow for guarantees, blue for anything that simply felt odd. The document soon resembled a bedraggled peacock. Inside Enron, optimism remained choreographed. Lay announced a new headquarters, 2 glass towers to be christened Enron 2. Employees cheered. In the cafeteria, posters urged them to buy company stock for retirement. Each paycheck saw more shares funneled into 401k plans. One engineer joked that diversifying in Houston meant owning Enron and living in an Enron power department. Laughter followed, comfortable, trusting. Sharon Watkins did not laugh. She drafted an anonymous memo to Lay titled "Potential Accounting Irregularities," 8 pages long, plain language, urgent tone. She slid it under his door at dawn, then walked to her desk feeling both weightless and doomed. Lay read the memo that afternoon. He forwarded it to Enron's law firm with a note: "Please handle." No reply reached Watkins. Autumn 2001 arrived like a furnace door opening. California's rolling blackouts dominated headlines, and skeptical analysts began probing whether Enron's trading strategies had amplified the crisis. Short sellers circled. One, Jim Chanos, compared Enron's cash flow against reported profit and saw a canyon between them. He described it to clients as a skyscraper of smoke. Positions were taken. Whispers gained volume. On October 16, Enron announced a surprise $618 million quarterly loss. The conference call had the hush of a stalled elevator. Fasto did not appear. CEO Jeff Skilling, famously combative, resigned for personal reasons. Analysts, once charmed by his swagger, sensed fear beneath the brittle courtesy of the call's closing minutes. The next morning, Arthur Anderson auditors arrived to collect shredding bins that had filled overnight. Inside the bins lay drafts of partnership agreements, side letters, even post-it notes reminding managers which numbers to re-optimize. A junior auditor watched the confetti swirl into plastic bags and wondered whether paper could truly forget. Bethany McLean's story hit newsstands with the title, "Is Enron Overpriced?" Investors who once quoted Lay at cocktail parties now quoted her article, tone shifting from admiration to unease. Enron's share price began a steady slide. $90, $70, $50. Employees stared at overhead tickers as if watching a beloved relative age in real time. Watkins, summoned at last, sat before the board. She answered questions under fluorescent glare. Were the Raptors real hedges? Were profits recycled through the partnerships? She spoke calmly, hands folded, yet her voice wavered when she described a balance sheet walking on stilts. Directors thanked her and adjourned for private session. In that session, one member reportedly sighed, "We've flown too close to the sun." By November, Enron needed fresh credit to survive the week. Lay called JP Morgan's chief risk officer. The line crackled with static and hesitation. Credit rating agencies convened emergency committees and within 48 hours marked Enron as junk. The downgrade triggered debt covenants like rows of collapsing dominoes. Cash evaporated. Employees evacuated their savings plans, only to discover trading windows were locked. The cafeteria posters remained, ghostly encouragements to buy more. Payphones in the lobby filled with staff calling spouses, voices tight, saying words they never thought they'd need, "We might lose it all." December 2, 2001. Enron filed for Chapter 11, the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history at that moment. Morning commuters on Louisiana Street passed picketers holding handmade signs. "Enron stole my pension," while reporters adjusted camera angles to frame the crumbling logo above the revolving doors. In a rented Houston ballroom, Lay addressed several hundred stunned employees. He spoke of cycles and resilience, but the microphone clicked off mid-sentence, "Batteries dead." Silence settled, heavy as Gulf humidity. Someone in the back whispered, "It's over." People began to drift out, some carrying boxes, others carrying nothing at all. Federal agents moved quickly. Fasto was indicted on counts of fraud and money laundering. He arrived for booking with a resigned half-smile, as if caught in a magic trick gone sour. Skilling surrendered months later, defiant, declaring, "I am innocent," to the sea of flashes. Lay, sunburned and tired, spent his final months awaiting trial at his Galveston Beach house, waves lapping indifferently. Sharon Watkins testified before Congress, her memo entered into the public record. Lawmakers praised her courage, though she felt no triumph, only the nagging thought that earlier courage might have saved thousands of retirees. In living rooms across America, viewers heard a new term, "mark to market," and tasted the bitterness of trusting where transparency lacked. The skyscraper itself still rises over Houston, now occupied by other firms, windows gleaming in afternoon light. Tour guides sometimes point and mention Enron, voice dropping a note, as if speaking of a storm whose clouds are long gone yet whose lessons still darken the ground. Frauds, they say, rarely begin with outright lies. They begin with small stories people tell themselves to keep celebrating, quarter after quarter, until the stories demand a physics of their own. And physics, unmoved by charisma or tangerine sunrises, eventually calls every story home. The summer sun baked the red brick facades of Clinton, Mississippi, in June 2001, yet inside WorldCom's headquarters the air conditioning ran at polar strength. Past a lobby dominated by a video wall of soaring stock charts, accountants shuffled into Cube Farm 3B, clutching binders stamped "Close Package, Confidential." They were there to seal a second quarter miracle, earnings that would keep Wall Street's love affair alive. At the center of the maze, Chief Financial Officer Scott Sullivan adjusted his cufflinks and studied a printout glowing with black ink. Revenue spiraled upward, expenses looked tamed, and profit margins gleamed like fresh chrome. All of it, he knew, hinged on a single entry labeled line cost capitalization, a phrase that sounded boring enough to escape curiosity. WorldCom had grown from a rural long-distance reseller into America's second-largest telecom carrier by buying rivals the way children trade baseball cards. CEO Bernie Ebbers, a bearded former motel owner with a preacher's cadence, paid for the spree mostly with stock, insisting that size guaranteed stability. Analysts called him the telecom cowboy, a Mississippi Sam Walton who could spin copper wire into gold. But behind the optimism lay a simple barcode of trouble. The dot-com crash had vaporized many of WorldCom's internet-era customers, while debt piled up like wet phone books. Earnings targets stayed sky-high, and each quarter's numbers had to clear the bar or investors might bolt. Sullivan devised what he called a temporary buffer. When network traffic sagged, so did the fees paid to outside carriers, the line cost. Under normal rules, those costs hit the income statement immediately. Sullivan suggested reclassifying a slice of them as capital expenditures, as though they built new infrastructure rather than merely rented it. The shift moved billions from expense to asset, inflating profit with the tap of a keyboard. Two senior accountants voiced doubts. One compared the maneuver to counting rent as a mortgage payment on a house you did not own. Sullivan thanked them for their diligence, then reassigned both to a compliance project in Phoenix. The buffer became policy. At first the fudge measured a few $100 million, barely a ripple in a $30 billion ocean. But the market demanded perpetual acceleration. Each quarter, Sullivan phoned his director of corporate accounting, David Myers, and asked almost casually, "How wide is the gap?" Myers supplied a figure, and the capitalization entry grew to fill it. Staff referred to the adjustment as the plug, a term borrowed from electrical work, something you insert when a circuit comes up short. By early 2002, the plug topped $7 billion, an invisible dam holding back a lake of red ink. Within the cubicles, whispers gathered. Betty Vinson, a soft-spoken manager who cherished quiet weekends crocheting, found herself posting adjustments of $500 million at a time. She drafted a resignation letter, but Myers persuaded her to stay, promising the decisions would be reversed when revenues rebounded. Months passed, the numbers only swelled. Vinson began waking at 4 a.m., heart racing, convinced she heard her name whispered in the hum of the refrigerator. The unraveling began with an email no longer than a haiku. Cynthia Cooper, head of internal audit, had received anonymous tips about risk in capital expenditures. One July night, she and two auditors stayed after hours, badge swiping through silent corridors illuminated by exit signs. They searched the mainframe and discovered journal entries tagged Capex ADJ dating back 7 quarters. Cooper printed the ledger. The pages, stacked, rose past her kneecap. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Over the next 3 weeks, she conducted midnight interviews in a storage closet converted into a makeshift war room. Vinson, voice trembling, explained how she had been directed to book the hit upstairs. Another staffer described deleting emails under orders from the very top. Cooper's team replicated the accounting using clean assumptions. Without the plug, WorldCom would have reported a loss of more than $1 billion, not the $2 billion profit it had touted. She prepared a memo for the audit committee, its tone clinical but urgent. On June 25, 2002, directors confronted Sullivan in a glass conference room overlooking manicured lawns. He listened, jaw tight, then offered a solution: "We can restate and move forward, no need for alarm." The board voted instead to fire him on the spot and disclosed the matter to Arthur Anderson, the external auditor already reeling from Enron's collapse. That night, WorldCom announced a breathtaking restatement of $3.8 billion, soon revised upward to $11 billion, the largest accounting fraud in U.S. history. Trading in the stock halted. When it resumed, shares worth $64 2 years earlier plummeted below $1. Employees watched retirement accounts evaporate like numbers on a malfunctioning display. In Clinton, local diners where waitresses once boasted of their WorldCom baby bonds, now buzzed with rumors of layoffs and lost tuition funds. Federal agents marched through headquarters collecting servers and binders. Ebers, claiming ignorance, held a tear-streaked press conference in a borrowed suit. He had mortgaged almost everything to cover margin calls. Sullivan pleaded guilty to conspiracy and securities fraud, receiving 5 years less than Cooper's team spent piecing together evidence. During sentencing, Vinson wept as she described choosing loyalty over integrity. She served 5 months in prison, crocheting blankets for hospice patients. WorldCom filed for bankruptcy protection on July 21, 2002, listing $107 billion in assets that now looked as solid as fog. 2 years later, it re-emerged as MCI, a slimmed-down carrier eventually absorbed by Verizon. The switchboards kept humming, but the aura of invincibility was gone, replaced by a cautionary echo in every earnings call about the thin line between aggressive accounting and outright deceit. Today, the former WorldCom campus houses a community college and a medical clinic. Maintenance crews repainted the hallways, yet faint outlines of motivational posters still haunt the drywall. The world is yours to connect. A janitor sometimes pauses by the old finance wing, knocks on a pillar, and remarks that the steel core outweighs the sheetrock shell. A reminder that substance, not appearance, keeps a structure standing. Then he sweeps on, leaving the corridor quiet again, save for the soft hiss of conditioned air whispering lessons about numbers that once soared higher than any satellite, only to fall silently back to Earth.